It's not that hard, okay? All right, get the out of here.
I'm going to talk a lot about drills and fundamentals.
Watch it, watch it, watch it, watch it!
On 93.5
Watch it!
and 107.5.
Boom, baby!
The Fan.
It is indeed the month of May, and at this state, everyone can get behind that, and I think we also all can get behind this. Let's pray that this is not the weather on the final Sunday of May.
Boy, you ain't kidding. I landed. We were sitting on an airplane in Atlanta, and they came overhead and said, folks, since we're the last flight of the night to Indianapolis here in Atlanta, we have one flight that has a connection that's coming in a little bit late, so we're going to go ahead and wait for some folks. So we were wheels up at about, I think, 12:15, 12:30. So landed at 1:30, something like 1:35, and I walked to the car, and I thought, well, this is brisk. 39 degrees when I got to the car last night.
Beautiful napping weather.
It is, and it is. The month of May is the month of May, Kevin. That's the reality. It gives you a little bit of juice. You've heard me talk about it from a standpoint of I get kind of nostalgic about it, but also just excited about it because we know what the month of May brings. It's always interesting because it turns the month of May, and you kind of think like, okay, here we go, and then you still have a – it's like when you drive to Florida and you get to the welcome station, you drink the orange juice, you're like, we are in Florida, and you forget you actually still have another 300 miles to go.
But at least there's that number 5 in front of any sort of dates.
Exactly correct.
We'll have Doug Boles on at 8 o'clock. And by the way, good Monday morning to you. It is dreary. It is ugly. It's chilly to start the month of May. But yeah, Doug Boles going to join us at 8, the president of the Speedway, fresh off the Barber race yesterday. It's obviously where Jake was returning from. And then Joel A. Erickson at 9 o'clock to recap a busy weekend over there for the Indianapolis Colts as they draft 12 players, the most for the franchise in the modern draft era, which would be 7 rounds. I think I was 94, if I'm not mistaken. So quite a few guys that we've got to get to know here over the next week. Rookie minicamp will come up this weekend. That will be Anthony Richardson and company in town on Friday for his first on-field action as a member of the Indianapolis Colts. How was Barber?
It was good. You know, I think Birmingham is a very underrated city. In particular, the east side of Birmingham, which is where the track is just beautiful. I mean, it really is a beautiful area. We went to the Birmingham Barons baseball game on Saturday night, all of us from the radio network, and had fun there. And then the race itself was good because Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin are starting to form a little bit maybe of a rivalry, a very sportsmanlike rivalry, but a rivalry nonetheless. And great crowd. And I sent you guys a video of the track. I mean, it's a beautiful facility. It really is. And I was in the museum. The museum is fantastic there. So it was a good weekend all the way around. And I was obviously paying attention to the draft as well, Kevin. And, you know, credit where due. To be fair, I mean, I have been critical of, in particular, I think last year at one point during this season, I said of the Colts roster, I'm like, you know, the Colts just aren't exciting. And mostly because they weren't athletic. They just felt like a franchise stuck in the mud. And I will give Chris Ballard credit. It appears as though, I'm not saying that he listens to the radio or reads the paper, but it appears as though he got that memo and thought, you know what, we've got to just become more athletic at every position. And that looked like a very designed strategy going into the draft.
Yeah, I know that was kind of the popular consensus over the last 48 hours, just how athletic this draft class is, which is certainly true. I mean,
I'm just going off of Let me rephrase that, Kevin. I'm not saying that it's an overly athletic class. I'm saying it appears from their own individual athleticism scores and everything else, and taking guys scoring high. It appears as though that's their perception of it. How's that?
Yeah, and again, if you go off this relative athletic score that we've talked about before, dating back to 1987, you pretty much combine all the testing numbers at the combine. It is a very strong, again, testing athletic group, however you want to describe it. That has really been Ballard's MO. I mean, this draft class is probably another notch above the rest, but in past Ballard drafts, the Colts have always ranked near the top of very athletic groups when you compare them to the other teams. For me, what stands out the most about this year's draft class, more so than athletic score and testing traits and, big wingspans and quick 40 times, et cetera, is I see earlier picks going to premium positions. And that, to me, if you are a Colts fan, you've got to be happy about, because it's kind of about time that the earlier picks are going to, in my opinion, the 5 positions that matter more than others. And in some order, that would be quarterback, that would be wideout, that would be left tackle, that would be defensive end, and that would be corner. And if you look at this group, the first 4 picks hit those first 5 premium positions. And 5 of the top 6 do, and 8 of the 12 of the entire class. So more so than athletic traits, because again, that's kind of been Ballard's MO. Ballard has always drafted premium testers. He's not always drafted the top most important positions with the earliest picks. And that is what stands out to me. Obviously, quarterback speaks for itself, but you come back and you take a corner, and then you take a wideout, then you take a left tackle, you take a couple more corners throughout the draft, you take 2 offensive tackles. Those sorts of moves, Ballard has not always had the emphasis for. And part of it is probably just because your roster's at a point right now where you haven't hit on those positions, and you kind of feel obligated to do that. But that, to me, is what stands out about this 12-man group, is finally I see an actual commitment to using your top picks on the positions that matter more than others.
Is this the first time in the history of the National Football League that a team has taken 2 players from Northwestern in the same draft?
How did Northwestern win 1 game with 4 draft picks?
There's only one school in the Big Ten with no draft picks, right?
Would that be Bloomington?
That is correct, yes. That's my understanding.
Surprised that Cam Jones did not get drafted. Yeah, we should try to get Pat Fitzgerald on this week, Mark. You want to go with the pronunciation for the first Northwestern pick?
Here's my question. The Colts seem to be fascinated with defensive linemen with difficult-to-pronounce names, right? I'm going to try this. I haven't heard. I'm going to try this, okay? And I mean this is no disrespect to the young man, obviously, but it's a challenging name. Adetomiwa, is that right?
Yeah, I asked him on the Zoom on Saturday. I was like, "Hey, man, will you just
Adebawore, Adebawore, Adetomiwa, Adebawore, right?
I think I've got it right.
Okay.
And this is, again, I would like to think straight from him, and hopefully I'm giving it a
Addy
decent shot.
Is that it? Addy?
Ade Tomiwa.
Okay.
Tommy is definitely like a big part of one of the syllables.
Okay, that's cool. Addy Tomiwa, yep.
Adebare.
It's not bad.
Ade Tomiwa Adebare. He wants the first name written out when you mention it in a publication, but he's good with just being called Tommy after that. So his father, I believe, a Nigerian prince.
Correct. Oh, was he a prince? Okay, I knew his parents were Nigerian.
And so that is where the heritage comes from. But Jim Irsay was tweeting about that last night. 280-some pounds, and he ran a faster 40-yard dash than the cornerback, Juju Brents, from Warren Central, by the way, who they took in round 2.
Another thing that is fascinating to me about the NFL draft, just about football in general, and I know that there are people that are going to blow me up and be like, dude, are you crazy? How do you not know this? Da, da, da. But I want Kevin Bowen, we are going to put truth serum in you right now, okay? Do you recall Julius Brents playing at Warren Central High School?
The only thing I really recall is another, kid from an Indiana high school going to Iowa. That is what I remember. I'm like, man, at some point, Indiana Purdue keeping a 3-star kid in state needs to happen. That's what I remember. But no, after that, I can't say I recall. I mean, obviously he was I think a grade behind David Bell. I mean, certainly David Bell was the big headliner at Warren during that time. But no, I don't.
The reason I say it is just because it is fascinating, the game of football. And I'm not saying he's one of them, but obviously you've got 50+ kids on a roster, right? So it's a little bit easier to kind of get blended in, but also just sometimes the late developers or the players that are selected because of just overall athleticism, despite maybe not showing that when they were 17 years old, that kind of thing. But it's a very cool story for sure for Julius Brents.
I mean, just maturation-wise, 17 to 21 can be huge. And in his case, it was 5 years in college. He started at Iowa, ended at Kansas State. We talked about it all for the past few months, how big of a need corner was. The Colts take 3 in this draft class, 2 of them out of the SEC. Juju Brents out of Kansas State. They obviously had a really nice year this past season. There is a golden opportunity for playing time with these guys. Now, Brents is dealing with a little bit of a wrist injury, so it doesn't sound like he's going to do the full work here in the spring, but should be cleared to go for training camp. I'll never forget Jake walking into the local pro day for the Colts, earlier in the month of April, and we've talked about it. The Colts local pro day, not an abundance of talent there. But I walk into that indoor facility, and I see this dude stand off to the side, and I'm like, wow, is that guy a linebacker? Is that guy a safety? No, he's a corner? I mean, he's huge. Legit 6'3", super long arms. It honestly, could not look more like a Seattle defensive back from when Gus Bradley was on those Super Bowl teams out there. I mean, that's exactly what his body type looks like. And, of course, Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator for the Seahawks, back when they had the Richard Shermans and the Cam Chancellors and those guys. So not only just a cool story, the fact that a kid that wore Bob Sanders' jersey growing up and had his draft party at Birdie's in Westfield, that he gets to stay home, but an awesome chance for early playing.
So they overall selected how many players?
12.
So that is nearly, and I think we both know, the draft always fascinates me, Kevin, because sometimes you have a guy that, and we've seen this in Colts draft classes. The Colts will have a draft class where a guy in the second round is a swing and a miss, and then a guy in a fifth rounder is outstanding. You know what I mean? Where you get selected it matters a lot in terms of your contract and whatever else, but not necessarily always in terms of which players are going to make the roster. But when you look at a 12-person class, which is a huge draft class, nearly 25% of a roster, how many of the 12, realistically speaking, and I don't mean individually sitting here going person by person, how many of the 12 realistically make a roster? 8, 9?
Yeah, that's probably a decent guess. The thing now that we've seen since COVID is the NFL's adopted these new practice squad rules, which grows the practice squad to 16. You can be promoted for a couple of games each time during a season. So it makes the practice squad pretty much like an extension of your normal roster. So the cut down to 53, I don't think it maybe has as much importance as it used to have. It's kind of like college football now. College football has you can play 4 games and still be a redshirt. I think it's a great rule to have. And it really helps freshmen that you just want to sprinkle in here on special teams, but maybe not expose them to an entire season, and you're still able to redshirt them. So, out of these guys, yeah, I could see 8 or 9 making it, but I could also see several of them being on the practice squad. Jake Witt, the final pick out of Northern Michigan, is just a great, great story. We'll touch more on that here.
Great first name.
Later in the show, certainly. Both those 7th-round picks kind of have a little Jake Query feel to it, and Jalen Jones and Jake Witt.
Jake Witt, actually, it's amazing because what you get there is my first name and then my greatest attribute, right? All in one. Kevin, you can't see it here, but
in
Kevin,
my opinion, that's
Kevin,
Marc a little slow on the draw.
Kevin's
still processing.
Kevin looked at. Well, that's the thing. See, and you know why that is, Marc? You lack the last name attribute of which I speak. See, that's the thing. That's exactly what I'm talking. And this is all happening, by the way. Mind you, keep in mind, 2 hours sleep in the last 64 hours of my life, and yet I come up with that. And then Kevin looked at you, and I believe, was it a head shake? Is that what I saw?
No,
just
I
a stare.
Thought it was pure eye contact
with Marc, and Marc was completely asleep at the wheel.
I just shook my head because I as soon as you said that, I was like, he did say right before we went on air, "This is the most tired I've ever been," and I said, "Oh my God, we have 3 hours."
Sounds like we're going to get an NFL schedule release at the end of next week. I'm curious when that Colts-Titans home game rolls around if they might want to honor us at midfield because our Mayo sacrifice led to Will Levis not being here and led to him being in Nashville instead.
You know, did you see...
Without our Mayo sacrifice, Will Levis is a Colt.
You think so?
Yeah, but then I was thinking about it, and I said, oh, boy, if a Will Levis-led Titans team beat the Colts, do we have to, like, down Mayo and coffee now?
I think that's a good point. If Will Levis is quarterbacking a Titan victory over the Colts, then the Monday after, you have to put Mayo in the coffee.
Okay.
You've lost, 5 in a row to him? Maybe that'll be the kick in the butt that you need for him.
As soon as that happened, I was like, oh, boy.
Someone sent me a tweet, and I realize that when you do a radio show, it's probably almost useless to like just focus on the echo chamber snow globe of Twitter because that represents probably 5% of our audience. But sometimes interesting things come out of it, and this is a fair point. I mean, it's a fair criticism. When someone asked the question of, Levis and Richardson, and Jim Irsay had said, we probably would have taken Anthony Richardson maybe even if we had the number 1 pick. That was the guy that we had zeroed in on in February.
Should I believe that?
No. And so someone sent me a thing and was like, are you still standing by your claim that Irsay likes Will Levis? And I'm like, yes. And it said, so you're saying that he got outvoted? I'm like, well, I don't think there was a vote. If there was a vote, you go with the owner. I think Jim Irsay stepped back and said, I've hired you guys to make a decision. You do what you think is best. I think we talked about the fact that Shane Steichen, you would assume, had a lot of influence on the quarterback pick. But then later in the same press conference, Jim Irsay said, look, we really liked Will Levis. If Richardson wasn't there, we probably would have taken him. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe either of those two.
You don't think so? But what reason does he have to lie about the second?
I don't really get why.
It is odd. I don't disagree with that. Or like when he said...
I mean, Ballard is pretty adamant that they would have done something different. So, I mean, one of them has to be fibbing or lying in that sense. My question more about taking Anthony Richardson number 1 overall, which is what he said they would have done. So you would have taken him number 1, but you weren't willing to trade up from 4 to 3 for him?
Right.
That doesn't really check the box for me or make a whole lot of sense.
Well, the other thing, too...
It was chaotic. Drake the dog was running around the media room eating media food.
Really? That's kind of cool.
Oh,
yeah. There have been people that have gone to that media room just for the food that do as much media work as Drake the dog. So the other thing to me that was peculiar, and I know this is kind of old news now, but I'm only saying it because it happened since we have last talked. When Irsay sent the tweet out saying, what do you think? Should we draft Will Levis in round 2 and do a Montana Young type thing? I thought that was unfair is the wrong word, but you have a young player who has yet to be drafted that the Colts weren't going to draft with their second round pick, one would assume. So I kind of wondered what the point was of sending that out.
Montana Young's a little different than Richardson Levis,
well,
right?
Yes, because you were passing the torch in one case for the most part.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that part of it. Again, I continue to think Anthony Richardson is going to play sooner rather than later. That's the vibe that I get. Obviously, it's May 1st, so we'll see how things unfold for him. Rookie minicamp coming up this weekend. We'll see how many OTA reps they even think about giving him, and obviously training camp in late July. On that end. A whole lot to get to on today's Kevin and Corey. Again, Doug Boles is going to join us as we kick off the month of May at 8. Joel A. Erickson at 9 o'clock. We'll continue to go over all of these draft picks for the Colts. I think, if there are some positions that the Colts did not address, linebacker and offensive guard would be the two there. There is an interesting undrafted free agent with some local ties that we'll touch on. Linebacker, is that good news for Shaquille Leonard? I don't think it's bad news on the Shaquille Leonard front.
Yeah, that's actually probably an encouraging sign, right?
Yeah, I would classify that. Obviously, I don't think they truly know until you get him on the field. And again, I think they feel very highly on EJ Speed being ready to handle, bigger duty if needed. One of the picks that I a big fan of, and Jake, I'm sure you saw him play in the ACC. Josh Downs in the third round out of North Carolina, just such a highly productive wideout. And I mentioned this several times leading into last week. The Colts do not need any more power forwards in that wideout room. They needed a point guard. They needed a shooting guard. Yeah, however you want to label it. They need more of that jitterbug type, and that is Downs' game. He's not a big dude. He's the one that probably stands out the most from a non-height standpoint. They list him at 5'10", 175. That's probably a bit generous. But that is a guy that just dominated in the ACC over the last 2 years, had nearly 200 catches. Don't forget, this year, when Notre Dame got ready to play North Carolina, Downs was questionable for that game, and just how big of a deal that was for North Carolina. Obviously, his quarterback, Drake May, who everyone thinks will go pretty high next year. But I think that is the exact sort of compliment the Colts need. I almost feel like this, Jake, and I don't know, maybe it's scar tissue from Wes Welker and Julian Edelman. I feel like the Colts have been absolutely torn apart by slot, speedy wideouts that just almost move like laterally better than they do vertically.
Right.
They just put their foot in the ground, and boom, 3rd and 5 turns into move the chains.
Correct. And he catches everything, right? I mean,
yeah, great catcher of the football, great route runner. So again, the size, now, not going to wow you, but I think this is the exact type of guy the Colts need.
He was all wet. Did you see that?
Yeah, some rosé poured on him after.
Was that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
He was drenched.
Yeah, very emotional after the pick. Super, super emotional. He was probably, Chris Ballard said it was the best draft call he's ever had. I think he was a bit frustrated by falling as far as he did. Ballard mentioned that they had tried for, he said, about 30 minutes to try and trade up for him. But yeah, that's a pick that I think, considering Anthony Richardson's selection, considering what you have with Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman, I like that type of wideout to round out what you have with that room. And like I said, when Paris Campbell left and Isaiah McKenzie was signed, I didn't view McKenzie as a ideal replacement. I view McKenzie as more of kind of that gadget guy. And Josh Downs potentially could be your slot receiver of the future.
It is. I thought about this, and I don't want to sound overly pessimistic here, rather just as a nugget of realism. And I'm not saying that one is equivalent to the other by any stretch. But I think when people are expecting that Anthony Richardson is going to come in and immediately be either a starter or a highly productive player, you've got to keep in mind, Kevin, again, not apples to oranges, or maybe it is apples to oranges. Which is the saying? Apples to oranges means not the same at all, right?
So it wouldn't be apples to apples, right?
Correct. Not apples to apples. Thank you.
It's a good game, though.
Oh, nice. Very good game.
A year ago, the intriguing, athletic, big, mobile quarterback that had everyone intrigued and curious, and that teams were talking about moving up into the first round to take, granted he fell, was Malik Willis. And Tennessee took him thinking that was going to be their guy of the future, and a year later, they spent their first pick of the second round on a quarterback. So does that tell you that – I'm not saying that that's Anthony Richardson. What I'm saying is that does tell you that athleticism, strength, dynamic college play in limited windows doesn't always translate to the NFL. You just never know. You just never know.
Yeah, I think the overall thought of you never know is spot on. I don't think it's necessarily apples to apples. I mean, where did Malik Willis get drafted?
Well, he was a third rounder, wasn't he?
Yeah, which is a lot different than 4 overall.
No, I get it.
And Richardson, size-wise, is much different than Malik Willis, but certainly just a projection to this level, and the accuracy element, would be very similar. And I think I said this on Friday, but this will probably be maybe my biggest thing with Richardson, because from an accuracy standpoint, you don't need him to get to 70%. You don't need him to be Rivers or Breeze. You need him to be like 63, 64%. But the question that I would have, which is just an unknown, and he never was really in many of these situations at Florida, and he only played a year. But Jake, when the fourth quarter rolls around, what's he like?
Right.
What is he like in those moments? I mean, Florida was 6-6 this year. They didn't have, big time moments late in games, monumental, hey, we're playing for the SEC East, or, we're playing for a trip to the semifinal. Whereas, in CJ Stroud's case, he obviously had those in college. So how will you look when the game is on the line, because as we know with the NFL, so much of this league comes down to those moments. Quickly on the NBA, pretty darn good. You give the Warriors 9 lives, and what's probably going to happen happened yesterday, right?
You know, I remember saying in that pivotal Game 5, whoever won that game was going to win the series. And then Sacramento comes back, and I thought, well, okay, maybe when they won 6, I'm like, okay, maybe they do go back and win, but that was impressive. Steph Curry was impressive, obviously.
50, the most ever for a player in a Game 7. Couple of notes now as we are into the semifinals for both the East and the Western Conference. First time ever you've had 4 lower seeds advance, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have all 8 seeds represented.
How about this?
First
How about
time
the
ever
fact
on
that you have the number 1 overall seed in the NBA bounced by Miami? Not the number 1 overall seed in the NBA, I'm sorry. The number 1 seed in their conference bounced by Miami. And then the number 1, the best regular season in the history of the NHL bounced yesterday.
Yeah. And the
Florida
defending
Panthers.
champs, my Avs. We were crying last night in the Bowen household.
I've got to look and see. Do we have to realign our teams?
As Jake would say, was it the Kraken that advanced?
That's right. Who did you have, Mark?
I had the Tampa Bay Lightning. They are gone now, so I guess my chips are all in on the Rangers, who are probably going to be eliminated
Well,
tonight
you
too.
can't have the
I
Rangers.
thought
are you?
Jake had both the New
No,
York
you
teams.
can't have both. You have to pick one or the other.
Why pick the Rangers?
Are they both alive? Islanders still alive?
No, Islanders melted.
No?
Yeah, they're out.
Yeah, is there some, like, Mark, you knows better. It looks like there was like an NHL curse with the number 1,
Yeah.
the best team with the regular season record.
The
Tends to lose very early.
Oh,
in
I
the
would
NHL
have
playoffs.
taken the field ahead of time, whether it was Boston or the field in the playoffs. Yeah, I didn't think that was going to be sustained success in the playoffs. So
hockey playoffs. That's why the NHL playoffs are so great, because it really is random. I mean, it's like you get a hot goaltender in particular. I'm not saying that's the case in that series, but you get a hot goaltender in particular, you could ride that for a series or two.
The Bruins were up 3-1, weren't they, in that series?
Do you know how often in hockey a team up 3-1 doesn't? I mean, it more often than any other sport.
Yeah,
seemingly.
It's just unbelievable theater. Tonight in the NBA, it'll be the Celtics and the 76ers underway. Joel Embiid doubtful for that one, and the Suns and the Nuggets game 2. The Nuggets handled Phoenix in game 1. All right, unfortunately, it's an ugly start to May here. The calendar's in May, so that's all that matters.
That's
but
right.
Weather-wise, it's ugly. It's chilly, a little bit dreary as well. Sounds like it's going to be cold for these first couple of days, but then the rest of the week looks really nice, and that's great for the mini coming up this weekend. Kevin Bowen, Jake Query, Mark Dykton right here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
The Morning Checkdown. On 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
We'll actually begin with a little racing from yesterday. Barber Motorsports Park, just outside of Birmingham, Alabama. It was Scott McLaughlin getting the win in the NTT IndyCar Series with a pass of Romain Grosjean late in the race. Grosjean, the pole sitter. That is now 5 runner-up finishes in his career for Romain Grosjean before he's still looking for his first win. I think eventually he will get that. Up next for the IndyCar Series, month of May is here, so that means the GMR Grand Prix coming up in 2 weeks, and then, of course, to end the month, the 107th running of the Indianapolis 500.
All right, tonight in the NBA, we'll get things underway with the Celtics and the 76ers. That'll be game 1 of that 2-3 matchup at 7:30. Again, Joel Embiid doubtful for that game. Celtics a big favorite, 10.5 at home. And then the second game of the night will be the Nuggets trying to go up 2-0 on the Suns. Denver handled Phoenix in game 1. They're favored by 4.5 tonight. Yesterday, Jake, I know you were pretty busy, but you had the Heat coming back and beating the Knicks.
And the Heat that is such a Heat thing, isn't it? Like, this is their time.
Yeah, down big after the first quarter.
Always.
But they came back and won game 1 in Madison Square Garden. And then in game 7, you had the Warriors with a historic performance from Steph Curry, the most ever in a game 7, 50 points for him. And Jake, you go back to game 3, no Draymond Green. You go back to game 4, Harrison Barnes has that, I think, a pretty good look to try and win it at the buzzer. It's just like, I get that game 7 was in Sacramento. You give a historically great era of players 9 lives.
Yep.
It's going to cost you.
And, you know, it's like I said at the beginning of that series. It just feels like in the NBA, teams have to, like, very few teams just roll up on the mountain and climb right over it. You know, you gotta do a couple of climbs before you finally summit. And, you know, whether it would be the Pacers having to get past the Knicks or then get past the Heat, or the Pistons having to get past the Celtics, or the Bulls having to get past the Pistons. And for Sacramento, clearly Golden State was saying, listen, you just got to the mountain, but don't think you're going to summit right away.
So the 2 series out west, Denver and Phoenix, and then the Lakers and the Warriors. That one obviously speaks for itself. And in the East, you'll have the Heat and the Knicks. Heat already up 1-0, and then Celtics and 76ers.
Major League Baseball yesterday, it was the Marlins over the Cubs 4-3. Sorry, Mark. Did you boo there?
Yeah, they got swept.
I was disappointed to see the Reds playing such great ball, and then they lose yesterday. Now, granted, they did lose to my pesky A's, which just need one to ignite a flame.
5-game losing streak snapped
That's because
for your
the septic
Athletics.
tank is bad at that stadium. An open flame could be disastrous.
Did you guys see the most losses in Major League Baseball history by May 1?
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
If you're going to be bad, be historic.
How about the Baltimore Orioles? Break up cute fella. 5-3 winners over the Tigers. Where are your Diamondbacks, Mark? Ooh, they won 9-4 over the Rockies.
Mm-hmm. Saw the White Sox finally won a game.
Boy, they made that interesting.
12-9 over Tampa, right? Snapping a 10-game losing skid.
10-game losing streak.
Victory Field going to be idle here, I think, for the next couple of weeks. Indians were postponed yesterday. Obviously, an ugly day here locally. 2-3 homestand for the Tribe. As you mentioned, some really drama-filled Game 7s in NHL last night. The Boston Bruins, the best record. Was it the best regular season record in NHL history?
I believe that's correct, yes.
They lose to the Florida Panthers, and my Avalanche, again, an emotional night in the Bowen household watching the Avs fall to the Kraken in Game 7.
Yeah.
No comment at this time other than that from me.
You know,
taking the Dylan Brooks approach?
I am taking the Dylan Brooks approach. Thank you, Mark.
You know, I thought they had that series in hand, and then it was like an avalanche. It just, and the Kraken came out of the sea, though, right? Isn't that what it is? Isn't the Kraken
like a giant squid or octopus?
No, I think it's more like the Loch Ness Monster, isn't it?
I felt like it, when you think you have the series by its claws.
I've seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I'm pretty sure it was like a giant tentacle comes out.
That's part of the Loch Ness Monster. He has tentacles.
The Loch Ness Monster does?
Yes.
I need proof.
The Loch Ness Monster, actually, I think, is just like
I don't know if we've
dinosaur.
had a lot of interaction with
the
the Loch Ness Monster.
The Loch Ness Monster, I think, actually is just like a plastic brontosaurus
You
somebody
just
took
want
a
to bring up
picture
the
of in
Loch
a
Ness
bathtub.
Monster so you can do an impression. Oh, yeah, Loch Ness Monster over there.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Doug Boles at the top of the hour. We come back. We'll get more into the Colts draft. Again, a lot of athletes.
Mate, you look at a monster coming out of the lake.
And a whole lot of premium position focus. Kevin Aquari here on an ugly start to this Monday in Indy.
You're listening to Kevin and Query on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Hey, good morning to you on a Monday. May is here in Indianapolis. Jake Query along with Kevin Bowen, Marc Dykton here as well. Hope you are set for a fantastic week. And again, a reminder, if you're running the mini marathon on Saturday, you can go with the Query fail-proof formula, which is 2 Pedialytes on Thursday, 2 Pedialytes on Friday, and plenty of water in both those days. Almost assuredly you will not cramp.
It's like someone getting ready for the Little 500 weekend. Hey, I'm going to visit my buddy IU this weekend.
Good point. So the NFL draft is complete. The Colts, did what the Colts do, which is accumulating a lot of the mid-round picks. The question that I have for you, Kevin Bowen, because you were there, you were sitting there covering the draft and putting out articles that are all on our website, profiling the different players or the different angles of the draft, the trades that they made to accumulate more picks. Was there a position you felt they neglected, and is there a position you felt that they unnecessarily addressed?
The neglected part, I would go either linebacker or just the interior of their offensive line. Probably linebacker more than anything. And again, you can look at it and say, okay, that's good news on the Shaquille Leonard front. I'd probably choose to look at the Leonard situation and say, boy, I need to be in the, I'll believe that when I see it sort of camp, just with how difficult the injury situation has been to gauge and how it's impacted him now for several seasons. There's several undrafted linebackers, and it's not the most pressing position in the world, but that's one. And then we mentioned the undrafted free agent, Jake, Emil Ekiyor, who played at Cathedral, started at right guard for Alabama. He is in the undrafted class, and we know this franchise's history. And I think if there are positions on a team where you're like, hey, where can an undrafted dude potentially have a long career? I think interior offensive line would be one of those spots. I mean, hell, Jeff Saturday would be the perfect example of that with this franchise. So Ekiyor does walk into not only a building he has some familiarity with, but he also, I think, is in a pretty good situation to potentially make the roster. I would say a position that I found interesting they drafted, and I'm sure when you look at the list, Jake, did you notice the Indiana football tie of the 12-man draft class?
The Indiana football tie? You mean the Warren Central tie?
No. Indiana University football.
Oh, wait a minute. Now I've got to look up. Hit me while I look it up. How's that?
I was going to say, should I?
Literally?
Yeah, should I walk over there?
It might wake me up.
This guy's quarterback was actually Gus Bradley's son in high school in the Jacksonville area.
Of course, Mallory, right.
Will Mallory, grandfather, of course, Bill, Uncle Kurt at Indiana State. Dad is a special teams coach in the NFL. Will Mallory, tight end from Miami.
Now you're going to laugh when I say this. I think most know by now, you don't need to clarify this, but that's Miami, Florida, because there are some that might think Miami, Ohio, because that's where Bill Mallory came from.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, this is the U. Will Mallory, and again, in typical Colts drafting fashion, ran the fastest 40 of any tight end at the Combine. What I find interesting about that, Jake, is his skill set is not necessarily known as a strong blocker. And when I look at the tight end group last year, not that they were some just incredibly dynamic pass-catching group, and certainly the quarterback play has a lot to do with that, but I would think blocking is more the missing element than being a big-time receiving threat for you.
I'm going to disagree on that. I think they do. I'm not saying that Mo Alley Cox and who they have, Jelani Woods, aren't these guys. Jelani Woods did show to be like a red zone target, but I think they need, and I have no idea if Mallory's this guy, but I just think they need a slip in the middle, extend yardage play tight end like you're starting to see more teams have. And by that I mean not like you're, to use the term I was told, battleship tight ends that take forever to turn around, but a Kittle Kelsey type guy. And those guys don't grow on trees. I get that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, love Kittle or Kelsey. I just felt
right. I mean, there's a reason those guys are elite. I get it.
I felt like the loss of Jack Doyle was really, really felt last season.
I don't dispute that.
And so I was thinking a little bit more in that mold. Now, again, granted, I mean, Jack Doyle was an undrafted free agent, so it's not like you necessarily need to find these guys in round 3 or round 4. But I bring up tight end, and Jeremy tweeted me earlier in the show saying, "Does the drafting of another young tight end spell the end of Mo Alley-Cox here?" You look at this tight end group right now: Mo Alley-Cox, Kylan Granson, Drew Ogletree, the rookie who had a really promising camp last year, tore his ACL. Obviously, Will Mallory. Jelani Woods, of course. And then they did sign a tight end in free agency, Pharaoh Brown, who has played in the league, has got a little bit more blocking experience than most. Those are 6 guys you could all make a pretty strong case for making the team. And it's a luxury if you keep 4 tight ends.
But don't they feel interchangeable?
Granson and Mallory, I think, fall into a similar group. A little bit smaller on the tight end front, a little bit more of like that. Remember Trey Burton a few years ago, who really helped out the Colts when they had Phillip Rivers? Just kind of like that hybrid tight end, like almost a bigger wideout. They kind of fit in that mold. So, cutting Mo Alley-Cox or trading him, that was a popular question that I received over the weekend. First off, what the hell are you getting from Mo Alley-Cox?
Right.
If Stephon Gilmore nets a 5th rounder, what are you getting from Mo? That would be the first question I'd ask. I also think Mo Alley-Cox, more than any of those tight ends I mentioned, he actually brings a little bit of blocking compared to the others. And again, I think that element is what you're missing more than some of the others. So I think tight end will be very interesting to watch them kind of pare that group down. I think Jelani Woods could have a breakout season. I think Kylan Granson has had some flashes. But if I were to see this draft pick of Will Mallory, granted it's in the 5th round, I'd be kind of like, ooh, this is definitely going to be a big camp for me. Jake, I think one of the best stories of the entire draft is the final pick the Colts had. That would be Jake Witt out of Northern Michigan.
Again, my first name and my strongest attribute right there in one guy.
The ego that you have when you're so tired is still...
It almost grows.
Unrivaled.
Yeah, it almost grows, to be honest with you.
Do you know what I've always said about my ego? I have none. About my humility. Do you realize how hard it is to be humble when you're me? Right?
My God, it's only 7:50.
I'm just saying. I think that's a fair observation, is it not? As you were, Kevin.
There's something to do with directional schools in Michigan and guys that have basketball interesting backgrounds that then play offensive tackle for the Colts. And let me explain. Obviously, Joe Wrights and Bernard Ryman would be 2 that immediately come to mind. Jake Witt appears to be the 3rd. The guy did not play organized football until his junior year of high school, and at that point it was 8-man football. He's from the Upper Peninsula, Jake. He was the Upper Peninsula.
Oh, the Yooper, yeah.
Mr. Basketball. He initially went to Michigan Tech to play basketball. So goes to Michigan Tech in 2018, plays basketball. Plays for a year, done with it. 2019, he transfers to Northern Michigan. When I think of Northern Michigan, I always think of them having a great hockey team. I always feel like they're in the Frozen Four. But nonetheless, he's at Northern Michigan as a regular student in 2019. 2020, he decides to join the football team. COVID hits, he sticks with football. He plays tight end initially at Northern Michigan. They're playing Ferris State in the 2021 season. They have a bunch of injuries in the first half. One of their coaches comes up to him at halftime and says, "Here's jersey number 65. You're playing offensive tackle for us." And now here he is, drafted in the NFL. Played offensive tackle, put on about 40, 50 pounds. Again, this is a dart at the board because this dude is very athletic. The big vertical, great tester. Tony Sperano Jr., the position coach here on the O-line for the Colts, went up there and worked him out. And the Colts say, all right, maybe he'll be on our practice squad for 2 years, but 6'8", 300-pound dudes don't typically move like that. He needs to put on a whole lot of strength and lower body and all of that, and he played at the Division II level. But you know what? Plop him on the practice squad and see at a position of importance if he can do something.
From the Marquette, Michigan newspaper, okay, which is in the Upper Peninsula, the opening headline of the article about Jake Witt being drafted. One of our very own Yooper athletes is headed to the NFL. Now, if you read that in the way they say it, it's, one of our very own Yoopers headed to the NFL. Yeah.
Kevin, you said the word plop, right? Plop him right in there.
That's nice.
Can you imagine if you were like Tony Sparano, the position coach, and Ballard comes to you, he's like, yeah, we're thinking about taking this dude that's barely played any college football in D2. You've got to go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, though, to work him out. Oh, gosh. Again, it's not like he's going to turn into this by any means, but I do think it's worth pointing out. Shane Steichen comes from Philadelphia. For those that watch the Eagles this past season, Jordan Mailata, one of their offensive tackles, was a rugby player. Hadn't played football. They draft him late, and he's turned into a hell of a story for the Eagles opposite Lane Johnson in Philly. So these sorts of picks on day 3, Jake, I think this is why you do some of these trade backs, collective picks. I'm not maybe the biggest fan in the world of it, but you sit here and you say, you know what? There are stories of this. Offensive tackle is a premium position. Why not give it a try? And we brought it up in the opening segment with the practice squad expanding. This is, I think, some of the thought process with the Colts trying to throw a dart here.
Do you know the last UP player selected in the NFL draft?
Oh, gosh. I do
Oh,
not
I'm
know.
sorry. The last Northern Michigan player. Sorry, Northern Michigan University player. Marc Maddox, household name, taken by the Buffalo Bills in 91. Do you know what people in the Upper Peninsula call the rest of Michigan residents?
I do not.
Trolls, because they live. This is a true story. Not trying to be funny. They call them trolls because they say that they all live under the bridge. I'm just saying.
Our next guest is no troll. That would be Doug Boles, the president of the Speedway. The month of May is
Doug
here.
Boles.
We'll get back into the Colts draft conversation after that, but we'll chat with the president of the Speedway coming up next.
Kevin and Query on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Yeah, you heard the promo right there. Jake, Beyond the Bricks, right? 8 o'clock tonight?
That is correct.
And that is every night during the month of May following Trackside with Kevin Lee and
That's
Kurt
right.
Gavin?
Mike Thompson and I pulling some of the audio archives of yesteryear. That includes our show tonight. I think we're going to play some audio from the early winners, those voices that you might not have ever heard before. Ray Haroon amongst them. The early winners of the 500 featured tonight. Tomorrow featuring Sid Collins, and then we'll also this week feature some of the Indiana drivers that have run in the Indianapolis 500 over the years.
I guess our next guest is a fan of that sort of listening experience. It is the month of May, so I can only imagine the emotions for Doug Boles waking up today. Although, Doug, I think when you take one look outside this morning, you say, let's get this out of the way on May 1st and save the final Sunday of May for a little bit better weather.
You know, I'm still so excited that it's May 1st. I haven't even gotten to process the rain, so I'm still fired up it's May 1st. But you're right. I think when I sit down and really start thinking about it, let's get it out of the way and make sure May 28th is a nice, beautiful, 75-degree, sunny Indiana day.
Doug, I was listening to you on with Jake and Marc Janes. This would have been, I guess, at the Oval Test. What was that? I guess a little bit over a week ago. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you say ticket sales for this year's 500 are the best since the turn of the century, excluding the 100th running. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. Last year was that, right? We were so surprised. We knew everybody wanted to come back, finally after COVID. So last year, we were surprised it was as big as it was. And then in another way, we thought, well, this is everybody finally gets to come back. And we were worried that this year would be a fall off from that, and it's actually up. And it's something I know our ticket team's tired of hearing from me because I'll ask them 4 or 5 times a day to make sure that we're continuing that trend, which has been fantastic. We had a great weekend of ticket sales. It's going to be the biggest crowd we've had since the turn of the century, other than the 100th. And then the only, obviously if the biggest worry for me would be like on weather on race day, and a few of those GA people don't show up. But our margin's pretty big right now. We could almost weather that kind of storm.
Doug, in terms of people that are indeed, you were talking about, I think we all were, right? Curious, not only coming off of the 100th, what the attendance would be, but then even though thankfully it's more and more in the rearview mirror, but coming off of COVID, what the attendance would be. For those people that are just now coming back and have not been for a few years, let's say pre-COVID, if you will, what sort of changes, if any, are new this year versus last that even anybody is going to see when they come out, or the improvements to the speedway itself?
Well, for this year, if you haven't been since before COVID, I think it's just the customer experience things that Rodgers allowed us really to work on, restrooms and the backside of the grandstands. If you're on the front stretch, a lot more space to move north and south, I think, has changed. This year, we continue to invest in customer experience. If you're a GA ticket holder, especially a GA ticket holder for our Grand Prix, there's a new video board that will play to the folks that sit on that spectator mound right next to the chicanes, the driver's left of the chicane. A few new video boards on the front stretch. We reskinned the pylon with some new LEDs, so that'll show up a lot better. Continue to work on some restrooms. One of the things that'll be new to us this year, but something that we all experience every time we go somewhere, we will have metal detectors at the gates as people go through, which will start from the moment we actually open up the gates for the first practice for the Grand Prix. These will be unique in the sense that you won't have to take anything out of your pockets. You can walk through with your coolers, so hopefully it doesn't slow things down. But that'll be a little different. But I think also one of the things we've heard from fans over the last few years is safety is really important to them.
Again, Doug Boles is with us here, kicking off the month of May. The Grand Prix coming up a week from Saturday, and then 2 weeks from Tuesday, I guess, we'll open up practice on the oval. Doug, I remember talking with you, I guess it would have been maybe the first few days after last year's 500, somewhere in that week, and as you debriefed with your team, you had mentioned kind of 2 things that stood out to you as areas that you wanted to continue to work on, and that was post-race traffic, which I would guess is easier said than done, and then just the handling of concessions on race day. Anything you'd like to share with our audience on either of those items?
Yeah, those were 2 really big pain points for us and for our customers. We've just been doubling down, so is local law enforcement, on trying to figure out what caused the issues last year coming in as well as getting out. Coming in was a little more challenging because you hope that you can get people in as quickly as possible. Leaving is always going to be a challenge because it's 325,000 people trying to leave the same location at the exact same time. So we've been working really hard with them. I think we have a good plan. You're obviously still going to have a wait when the second largest city in the state of Indiana is in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But I feel pretty good about that. And we've worked with our concession partner pretty significantly. So our points of sale, we're going to go up about 40%. The number of points of sales we have, we've been working with them really hard. They actually ran out of concession food at different places, so we worked hard with them to try and solve that. So fingers are crossed. I mean, it's been the two high level things we've worked on since last May.
Doug, this is kind of a tough question, or a tough answer, I guess. The question's easy. The answer might be harder. I've tried my entire life, a half century now on the planet, 45 probably years of those I've been aware of what it meant to me, but I don't know that I've ever been able to find the words to it. How would you describe to somebody who is not from Indianapolis or who hasn't stopped to grasp the heritage of it, what it means for the month of May in this city?
Yeah, that's the question I get, just like you, I get a lot. How do you describe the Indy 500 for somebody that's never been? How do you describe it for what it means to this community? It is one of those things that you say, you almost just have to be there. But I think what it really means for our community, and by community, I don't just mean Indianapolis, I mean the state of Indiana. It is a moment every year, for the 107th time this year, that the state of Indiana is on an international stage where the eyes of the sporting world, the eyes of the event world, certainly the eyes of the racing world are on our city and our state, not just our race car drivers and our events. So it's an opportunity for us to showcase the things that make Indiana so special. So the way we celebrate the men and women who've served and honor those families of servicemen and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country's freedom. It's about 33 men and women who are going to strap a race car on their back and forget the risk, and they're going to do everything they can to reach racing immortality by crossing the Yarda Bridge before everybody else at the end of 500 miles. And it's like a massive family reunion with people that you may not even really know, but when you show up in the facility and you look around and you realize you're at a really special place and you see tears rolling out of people's eyes during Back Home Again in Indiana or during TAPS, you realize that you are at a place that is so much more than a race. And at the end of the day, it is that opportunity that we have as Hoosiers to showcase our Hoosier hospitality and our appreciation for the country that we live in, that everyone around the world pays attention to.
I think one of the things to me, and I've said this before to you, Doug, many times. I know Doug Boles, our guest, the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He's on the Payless Liquors hotline. To me, the thing that makes IMS so special is that, in the Indianapolis 500 in particular, is that it's the one event I can think of where everybody in the crowd feels their own personal connection to it, and they are convinced that their connection is more significant than everyone else's, but not in a bad or competitive way. I think there's an appreciation for everybody looking around the venue, realizing that they are sharing in that experience that everybody else shares in their own private way. And I don't know that there's anywhere else I go that you can say that about.
You know, it really is a testament to the fact that the Indianapolis 500 is celebrating its 107th running with over 300,000 people in it because of the fans. The fans are what has made this event the event that it is over the years. This racing's spectacular. The drivers are heroic. The stories are pretty amazing, but it's the fans, the constant of the fans, generations of fans who have been introduced by their dad or their granddad, or somebody has brought them along and introduced them to it, and then they continue to tell that story. We are a privately owned company that, just like you said, there are hundreds of thousands of people that believe it is their company. And that's a really unique spot to be in, and it's the one fortunate place for us to be in, is that it really is all about the fans. And we're fortunate that Tony Hallman was a fan, the Hallman-George family forever, they were fans, and now we have a new fan leading the way in Roger Penske, and he gets that concept that this really is about the fans and their unique connection to it.
So, Doug, let's talk about Doug Boles, our guest, the month itself, because it is more than just actual race day. So if you could, and I realize while driving off the top of your head, although I'm guessing you've gone over this a few times, the calendar of events and the things going on aside from the 107th running of the Indy 500.
Well, the month sort of kicks off this Saturday, right? I mean, we get the mini marathon where 35,000 people actually run around the track about halfway through the mini marathon that the 500 Festival does, and then our Rev event, which is an IU Health Foundation event, that's sort of the party that kicks the month of May off, is Saturday night, and then a week from Friday, we open the gates for the GMR Grand Prix practice and qualifying, and then we have that GMR Grand Prix race on a week from Saturday. That race, for those people that still don't, I still get a lot of people that say, well, what kind of cars run that? It's the Indy 500 drivers. There'll be 27 or 28 of them that run in their Indy cars, a little bit different body work because it's on the road course, not the oval. It's a really great event, especially if you want to bring kids or you want to come to the race for the first time but don't want to deal with 300,000 people. It's a great way to experience that. Take 2 days off, celebrate Mother's Day, give the teams a day to get cars converted, and then on that following Tuesday we have practice for the Indy 500, and then normal qualifying weekend. I'm excited about qualifying this year. On that Sunday, so 2 weeks from this Sunday, we'll actually have bumping. We have 34 cars in the field, so that'll create some drama on Sunday for the pole position, the fast 12, and then bumping. And then we'll have a final practice. One of my favorite days of the year is the Monday after qualifying. We're actually open for practice, and it's really a full tank practice where the teams are getting a few hours of running in packs and trying to get ready for race day. And they take a few days off. We do carb day. Last practice, Bryan Adams concert, pit stop competition, and then we got the parade downtown, a concert downtown, and then race day on Sunday, May 28th. So that's kind of how the month goes.
Okay, so we're bumping one this year, like you said, same qualifying format, fast 12, if you will. What should we be on the lookout for from like pre-race announcements? Just hearing you describe it a few minutes ago already got me, chills, kind of thinking about how much I love that time of the year. Pace car, green flag, anything else that I'm missing?
Yeah, national anthem singer. We'll have a variety of celebrity announcements between now and then. Folks that are going to be involved in the race, including the GMR Grand Prix. So we'll start doing that stuff this week and next. And pace car's coming up pretty soon. Excited about that. Working on finalizing the pace car driver. We've got a couple of people really interested this year. Honestly, the challenge with the pace car anymore is because it's 650 to 700 horsepower, you really have to go train before you can come and we just plop you in the car. We've seen incidences where very talented drivers have had incidents in the pace cars. We don't want to have that happen. So just working through those schedules now make it a little bit harder than just somebody can show up and get in the pace car on race morning. So we're trying to finalize those pieces, and I'm pretty fired up about it. And then, that tradition that everybody's used to back home again in Indiana, command to start engines, just that pomp and circumstance leading up to the 500 is the best 30 minutes of the year.
Doug, I think I heard this recently, so I want you to be able to clarify it. It may have been from you, truthfully, but I know that when Roger Penske bought the facility, there was conversation, and I don't know that it was necessarily from Roger Penske, maybe it was insinuation or assumption, that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway would become more of an entertainment venue and that concerts perhaps would be, and I'm talking about outside the month of May, that different entertainment aspects of the Speedway may be explored. And then we all know, COVID happened, and so things kind of get put on the back burner. Is that stuff back into conversation again?
So you're right. In 2019, in November, actually the day I think that Roger was announced as purchasing the Speedway, in his press conference, he talked about how he wanted to really make this more of an entertainment destination as well, and utilize the facility to benefit the city of Indianapolis and the state of Indiana and draw more people in. And the more we can draw people in for other reasons, the more opportunity we have to communicate to them to make them race fans. And then COVID hit. And then Roger just said, look, we need to focus on getting the 500 back to the 500. That's our bread and butter. Let's not think about anything else. And then really in the last, maybe towards the end of last year, but certainly the beginning of this year, there have been high-level conversations about, okay, what are the next steps to start that conversation again? Not so much that the conversations have really started again, but just thinking about, we're going to have those conversations about what does our 1,000 acres look like? How do we work with the city and the town and Speedway to really think about a long-term development? Let's start putting the processes together in place. I don't think it's around the corner, but the conversations are in their infancy, which hasn't happened since 2019.
Okay, a week from Friday, right? Is that qualifying and is that practice and qualifying for the Grand Prix?
Yep, ready to roll.
A week from Friday where things will get underway for a busy, busy month of May. Doug, I look forward to our conversations all month long, and like I said, just give us the weather maybe coming up for this weekend, that final Sunday in May, and everything will be golden. Thank you for the time this morning.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll see everybody in a few days.
That is right. Doug Boles right there on the Payless Liquors hotline. Last year, I remember the Grand Prix being some pretty wild weather, which led to a wild race. You remember that?
Was last year the one where it rained?
I thought it rained a ton in May.
And like Colton Herta was going through, and like I could barely. Was that last year?
It just like all the spray coming up.
Yeah,
from the water
it was
on the
awesome.
Track. Yeah, it was quite a lot of drama.
I'm looking right now, by the way.
Uh-huh.
You're the one that you never say it if it's. The forecast right now is 76 degrees for race day. That's all it says.
Oh, my God. If I would have brought that up, you'd have been like, the kiss of death. You are looking at weather 4 weeks in advance.
I know. I get it. The forecast for the mini marathon, by the way, still early. Partly cloudy, mid-50s. Are you running the mini?
I don't believe in jinxes, by the way. I am not running the mini. If I ran the mini, I'd still be running probably in June.
Nah, you can do it. Mark, you running the mini?
No.
Come on.
What do you mean, come on?
You guys could do it. Let's go.
You could do it.
I'd rather just drink coffee and mayo.
Well, to each their own pleasurable morning torture, I guess, right?
Is the AFC South fun again?
It is. It's interesting. It's interesting. And you know what's interesting about it? Let's say hypothetically that you're starting quarterbacks next year. I mean, Ryan Tannehill's going to start in Tennessee, but let's say that Ryan Tannehill, let's say he's got an injury, and Will Levis starts. If your quarterbacks are and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm going to ask it, Kevin, with the assumption of an answer, but I don't know for certain, okay? If Will Levis, Gardner Minshew, I'm talking about week 1, Gardner Minshew, Will Levis, Trevor Lawrence, and C.J. Stroud are the 4 starters. Is Trevor Lawrence the youngest of them in the AFC South?
Isn't Stroud like 21?
So is Lawrence.
No way. Trevor Lawrence is 21 years old?
Let me see. Well, he's probably 22 now, I guess.
Been in the league for... This will be his 3rd season.
Yeah, I guess you're right. He was 20. Well, he was 20 when he came out, I guess, right?
Because you got to leave be in college for 3 years.
I think he's
Trevor
younger.
Lawrence is 23 years old.
Okay, how old's Will Levis? Maybe that's what I was thinking.
He's younger than Levis.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
But Stroud, I think, is only like 21. And obviously Richardson.
But I think Richardson's going to start week 1, don't you?
Will Levis is 23. Yeah, he'll turn 24 on June 27th.
Okay.
Trevor Lawrence doesn't turn 24 till October.
If I'm betting on May 1st, I have more confidence that Anthony Richardson starts week 1 than Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you should care about this or if this should be part of your thought process, but if I'm Shane Steichen and I am thinking to myself, I would like to win. I would like to not lose football games. Don't you think maybe a little bit of the unpredictability with Anthony Richardson as a starter would be something that
correct?
You could
keep it close to the vest,
into?
You mean? Right.
And just getting ready for that sort of quarterback, you really don't know exactly what things would look like. Again, rookie minicamp coming up this weekend for the Colts, so that will be Richardson getting on the field for the first time. Really, the rest of the spring, it's kind of late May is when you get into those OTA sessions. That's when veterans and rookies are together for the first time on the field. There's 13 team sessions, so there's 3 weeks of OTAs, which are voluntary, and then a 3-day minicamp in mid-June. So 13 total team sessions. That's when we'll see, okay, is there any... I would expect Minshew to take the vast majority of those reps, but do you start to get into any sort of Richardson at that time? And then obviously when training camp rolls around in late July, that will be something to keep an eye on. We'll play some draft audio coming up here in a little bit, and we'll probably focus really on the draft the rest of today. Joel A. Erickson going to join us coming up at 9 o'clock. Again, a local product that I think probably has the best chance to be a full-time starter from day one. An interesting name in the undrafted group. And did you see Aiden O'Connell, Jake, to the Raiders?
I did see that. Good for him, right?
So the Purdue guys kind of went in a flurry there in round 4. Michael Mayer, by the way, Notre Dame tight end to the Raiders. A lot of Colts fans wanted to see Mayer here. The Raiders traded up with Indy. And actually took him at pick 35, whereas the Colts traded back twice and then took Juju Brents.
You know, a quarterback that we've talked a little bit about going into the draft that I thought landed in a really good situation, Kevin, is Hendon Hooker.
Lions, right?
Yeah, because...
And he fell, round 3.
And they basically said, we are going to basically let him just get healthy that first year and learn. You know, I mean, they're not ready to hand it over from Jared Goff right away, right? So... I think that's a really good situation because there's not going to be pressure on him to get it in play right away and hurry back from that injury. And he could be a good player. You know, we'll see. He could be a good player, though. But
Stetson Bennett to the Rams.
Yeah, that was late, right? What round was that?
Round 4 for him. But
that seems high, actually.
Yeah, he was Vegas had him going undrafted. That was the favorite on that end. I believe I saw a stat where it was the most quarterbacks ever taken in the first 4 rounds of an NFL draft.
Man, which is...
I think teams almost kind of look at that Brock Purdy thing and think, hey, can we try and get ahead of that?
You know, somebody asked a question to me, which was a pretty good one, and it was rhetorical, but if Brock Purdy had not gotten hurt, somebody asked me, how many teams that are lobbying for a quarterback in the first 10 picks would have traded their first-round pick 3 months ago for the last guy picked in last year's draft? I mean, I think we know that would not actually be the case, but it is. But the point's well made, right? That you just never know when a guy. San Francisco, I think, is done a really good job of building a roster that
sure, yeah, it helps
and facilitates for a lot of quarterbacks.
Samuel Kittle and Christian McCaffrey. All right, again, we'll continue to talk some Colts. Let's hit a morning checkdown.
The morning checkdown. On 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
For the first time in NBA history, you had 4 lower seeds advance out of round 1. The final of those became the Golden State Warriors as they beat the Kings in Sacramento in Game 7. It was Steph Curry with a historic performance, the most ever in a Game 7. That's 50 points for Steph Curry. They're actually down at halftime. You kind of forget that when you look at the final score. But just an incredible performance by Steph. And Jake, you just felt like, honestly, when they came out for the third quarter and Golden State went on like a little bit of a run, you could feel the crowd be like, there's no chance we're going to win this game.
No, I mean... When Curry, I saw he hit one shot and he's falling down. You know, he's doing, and right then you're like, okay.
He's like the ultimate crowd silencer. Like, oh no, you know, just
yeah. Well, the funny thing is I shouldn't say half the people in. I think the Kings and Warriors are probably somewhat rivals. Maybe not for the Warriors, but for the Kings because they don't like being kind of the little brother. And they're only, I mean, those two. You know, you're talking 3-hour time difference between the two, but. There are probably some Kings fans that deep down really like Steph Curry, right? And they're like, oh, boy, here we go.
Curry is a pretty likable star just in general on that front. So we've got 4 series now in the semifinals. Again, it'll be the Lakers and Warriors. That'll start tomorrow night. The Heat are up 1-0 on the Knicks. They come back to win Game 1 yesterday in Madison Square Garden. And tonight we'll have 2 games. It'll be the Celtics playing the 76ers. It sounds like no Joel Embiid. He's listed as doubtful for that game. And the Nuggets, they went up 1-0 on Saturday night. They'll have the Suns in Denver tonight at 10.
I keep saying Boston's going to win the whole thing. But Denver's pretty darn good. Look, newsflash, right? I mean, they've been good all year. They've been good for a while.
Quietly go about their business.
They
for being
do.
A 1 seed.
And they're really, I mean, they're pretty good for what it's worth. IndyCar Series yesterday, the winner is Scott McLaughlin. Making a late pass of Romain Grosjean, who was the pole sitter. So McLaughlin comes to the month of May with the momentum on his side. That is the 5th time that Romain Grosjean in his career has been a runner-up. He has yet to win.
Not a ton of drama,
series,
I felt like,
I would agree with that. Not a lot of drama is a good way of saying it. But a beautiful day in Alabama and a really good crowd So that's the good news. As the month of May is here in Indy. Major League Baseball yesterday. Marlins over the Cubs 4-3. It was the
Cubs going down their leg this whole weekend.
I was going to say, it wasn't Reds. Reds have won 5 of 6. I don't care about yesterday's
The
line.
Dodgers doubled up the Cardinals 6-3, but I got to tell you, the fan base of St. Louis, that's the smartest fan base in watching their team get swept that you will ever find. Diamondbacks over the Rockies 9-4. Reds on the short end against the Athletics 5-4 in a game that would have been really awesome if it was 48 years ago. Red Sox over the Guardians 7-1, and cute fellow the Baltimore Orioles 5-3 over the Detroit Tigers. Indianapolis Indians and Columbus Clippers were rained out.
And per usual, last night the NHL offered some great postseason playoff hockey. It was a pair of Game 7s in overtime. It was the Bruins getting upset by the Florida Panthers 4-3. So one of, if not the greatest regular seasons in NHL history, does not lead to a first-round playoff win for the Bruins. And the Avalanche, the defending champs, they lose to the Kraken 2-1. So both 1 seeds on home ice last night, losing in round 1.
You know, when the Kraken came out, I thought that was a dumb name. People seem to like it, though.
I think it's a great name.
Do you really?
That's solid.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the colors I don't like.
I think the
I think
uniqueness
that's what
helps,
does it.
too.
And I love the city of Seattle. I mean, I love everything about Seattle, right?
Oh, I think it's got like Mariner
Other than Pearl
vibe
Jam, I think
colors.
they're a little overrated. But what's that?
I think it's got like little Mariner vibes to it.
It does, but I don't know. There's just something about it. It looks like the generic, like the early '90s when the Raptor, everybody was doing the teal thing, and it was, and the Pistons tried it, and silver, and I don't know. I can't get into it.
I think kind of, again, fits a little bit of the old school Mariners look. I feel like Edgar Martinez is going to drive the Zamboni next
See,
year.
I think of
Maybe
the old
Jay
school
Buhner.
Mariners look as the royal blue and gold of Ken Griffey Jr. But point well taken. I get it. Point well taken.
12 draft picks for the Colts. We'll get more into those coming up on the other side. Kevin and Corey on what is, unfortunately, a dreary start to the month of May.
and 107.5, The Fan.
Kevin, I saw, and I'm not saying I totally disagree with this, but I'll just directly reference Marc Boyle. Every year, Marc Boyle, one of his things, Marc Boyle, the fantastic radio voice of the Indiana Pacers, he has a real mental block when it comes to the acceptance of draft grades. And I can't say I blame him. I mean, he's always like, why are we doing this? There's no way to know the grade of a draft until these players play. I guess the easiest way to say it, because I think it's a fair point by Marc, but at the same time, if a new movie is coming out, you can try to predict how well acted the movie is going to be if it contains performers that you have seen in previous roles, and therefore you have a general idea of how they may be in a movie. In this case, with the NFL draft, I certainly understand that most guys, did a lot of people see a kid that's drafted out of Northern Michigan in late rounds playing, and I get it. I mean, probably few do that are talking about this is a great pick or that's a great pick. So with all of that disclaimer out there, I am still curious from your standpoint, because you watched and covered the draft and each pick. Was there a franchise that you said to yourself, what exactly are they doing? Marc did not hesitate.
Marc, you got. I'll be totally honest. I could probably just throw one out there, but I was just so kind of focused on the Colts draft. I probably didn't pay as much attention to others. But Marc, you were very urgent on that one.
Well, the Detroit Lions, the one that I was thinking about this even yesterday driving back from Nashville. I'm like, so the Lions traded out of their draft pick, the top draft pick,
right?
Just 6 overall, was that right?
Right, and then they drafted a running back, which had a lot of people scratching their heads. And if you're going to take a running back, why wouldn't you just draft the best running back on there and draft Bijan Robinson? Why'd you reach for a guy that was scheduled to go in the 40s, apparently? From
maybe that's who they thought was the best running back.
Maybe, but
that's a little different style.
There were probably people that called in and said, what is Indianapolis doing? If you're going to draft a quarterback, why wouldn't you, or a running back, why wouldn't you draft the best one in Ricky Williams instead of that Ed Geerin James guy? Right?
Ed Geerin. That, and then they just had
Are you not a Hendon Hooker fan at 68 overall?
No, that one I did like. That was one I actually did like that one. But a lot of the draft picks ahead of that, like a Laporta over
Michael Mayer.
Michael Mayer was questionable. The Jack Campbell pick from Iowa. I mean, the first 3 picks from the Lions is kind of like, that's interesting. For a team that's on the precipice, apparently.
Said this earlier about the Colts. Well, the running back pick is certainly kind of a win now move by them. To me, the athletic traits and the obsession over that from Chris Ballard, that is not too far from what he's normally done. I mean, if you look at past drafts, he has done that on a very, very consistent basis. I mean, hell, I did a mock draft for the Colts, and of the 9 picks of players I had mocked, I had 3 of the 9 that they ended up picking. Why? Not because I know, can predict the future, but Chris Ballard's a pretty predictable individual when it comes to the draft. You just look for the top athletic scores. If they played in the Senior Bowl and they are a team captain, there's a good chance the Colts
do
have
other teams emphasize that to the level of the Colts?
I don't think to the degree. There's, a lot of teams obviously pay attention to those athletic traits and all of that, but I don't think to the level that the Colts do. What I think Colts fans should like about this draft class, and I think it's more so than any of the previous now 7 drafts Chris Ballard's done, is we have finally seen a heavy, early emphasis in the draft on the positions that matter the most in the NFL. Look at the first 4 picks. Quarterback, corner, wideout, left tackle. Outside of probably those 4 positions and defensive end, you would say are the 5 most important on an NFL team. And Jake, in past drafts, you've taken a running back in round 2. You've taken a guard in the top 10. You've taken a linebacker very early. You've taken safeties in round 1. And now, maybe this is the altering of his approach this offseason, because the free agency was same old, same old. Nothing really changed there. But if there is one area I think you can point to with this draft class that I am very intrigued by, is you have made this commitment to the premium positions with these selections, and I say about time.
This is nitpicky of me, but while I have always said offensive linemen and corners or defensive backs, sunglasses and phone chargers, you can never have too many. It's impossible to have too many of them. However, it did feel to me, Kevin, a little bit like the Colts had to address some needs that were needs because of decisions made by the Colts.
Oh, without question. Yeah.
You know, and that you could have addressed the need elsewhere.
I mean, you can point to that, Jake, and that could be the reason why I just made the point that I made. Like, they made a commitment to premium positions because they failed in those areas in recent years.
The other thing, by the way, that we addressed earlier or mentioned earlier for those that are just joining us, and by the way, good morning to you on a Monday if you're just joining us. Where have you been? We talked about the draft earlier, and I was saying to you, Kevin, I thought that looking at where or if the Colts drafted a linebacker was going to tell us a lot about what they anticipate for Shaquille Leonard. And if you are a fan of what Shaquille Leonard brings to the Colts, you probably are optimistic based on the draft.
Yeah, 12 draft picks and no linebacker. We will have Joel Erickson joining us here in about 20. He mentioned that I want to say the biggest signing bonus the Colts handed out in the undrafted group of free agents was to a linebacker, a kid out of Houston. So that is a group that we saw last year. JoJo Doman made the team as an undrafted free agent. I think that is a wide open, undrafted spot this year at linebacker. I was very curious to see when they would pick a linebacker. Ballard's had such great history in picking that position, especially later on in drafts. I assumed that they would, and they did not. I would say out of this draft class, linebacker and guard, again, a little bit later. I'm totally good with the premium positions being focused on early. I thought maybe later they would do that. Also on the corner front, and again, this might sound a tad nitpicky. They drafted 3 corners, 2 out of the SEC, and then Juju Brents, the local product from Warren who played at Kansas State. It sounds like all of them are outside corners. Well, Kenny Moore is in a contract year, and Kenny Moore did not have a great 2022 season. I thought they might try and find a future Kenny Moore at some point in this draft. Again, they drafted 3 corners, but it sounds like all of them are outside. So Dallas Flowers, Isaiah Rodgers, and 3 rookie corners. I would say out of those 5 guys, 2 of those will be your outside corners coming up here in 2023, and then Kenny will be that nickel slot guy for you.
But you don't know, is corner, let me ask you this, Kevin, is corner kind of like guard in the NBA where a guy might have played like on ball or, with the ball or off ball throughout all of college, so you think of him as pigeonholed as being either a ball handling guard or an off guard, and then you realize when he gets to the NBA, he's got the skill set to do both. Enter Nimhard comes to mind, right? Is corner a position where you can look at that, but then once you get them into the league, you can move guys around a little bit? Yeah. Or are they pretty pigeonholed with where they've been?
I think in this case, they are a bit pigeonholed because, honestly, there's probably some people that would look at Julius Brents and see his size and think, boy, he's more of a safety or a linebacker. And Jalen Jones, the final corner that they took, he was actually the highest rated safety recruit in high school coming out. So, I mean, he has more of a safety background than kind of a slot corner. So I think that will be something to keep an eye on.
If you got drafted, if you were an Indianapolis product that got drafted by the Colts, so this is your hometown, and you're 21, 22 years old, would you immediately buy a house, or would you either A, live at home, or B, live with buddies in Broad Ripple?
Well, the buddies in Broad Ripple probably wouldn't end too well, so I'd probably live at home. I
Would you
believe
really
that's
live
what
at
Jack
home?
Doyle did initially. Now, he wasn't drafted. He came here in July of his first offseason, the Colts, or I guess August.
Jeff Teague lived at home when he came back to the Pacers.
Really?
Yeah.
Jeff Teague to Pike. Is that
is now done, yes. Jeff Teague is the new head basketball coach
I honestly
at Pike High
think,
School.
Jake, there would be, as great as it would be to have your son or daughter, in the Fever's case, play for their hometown team, I do think there would be a little bit of is this too much pressure?
Oh. Ask Jeff George. He's the number one overall pick.
Right. And obviously a lot of expectations come with that. But even if you're like a Juju Brents or you're Jack Doyle.
Right.
I mean, just the amount of requests and the amount of
ticket
hey,
requests.
Man, could you come speak to the team after practice? The high school team after practice.
Yeah,
if
right.
you're out in Seattle, you're not worried about any of that stuff, and you can kind of just beat your own drum. We'll take some calls 317-239-1070 as well. Your thoughts on the draft. Let's go to Greg. Greg, good Monday morning to you.
Hey, good Monday morning to you all. Love the show. It's my favorite thing in the morning before I get to what we call hell work. So, really appreciate everything you guys do.
Now, Greg,
should we ask what you do?
I'm a long-term care health administrator.
Okay, well, that's a noble profession for certain, and helping out a lot of people, which is admirable. Now, let me ask you this. Do you like this radio program because you're on your way to what you describe as hell, and so therefore anything would be decent? Is that? Do you like us by default?
No. This is like, it makes me kind of forget that I'm going to hell.
Well, Greg,
should we add that to the resume? Should we add that to our LinkedIn? Maybe?
Greg, if you could have and you're more than welcome to come to the PBR party. Diet Cokes are perfectly sufficient. Greg. If you were going to sit and have a PBR with either me, that would be Jake, or Kevin, which one would you pick? And I won't be offended.
Oh, my God, it would be you, Jake, for sure. I don't know if you remember a text I gave you one time, but I said you are Larry David of Sports Talk Radio.
Well, that's a very high compliment.
Jeez, Greg, thanks for that. If you talk to Jake,
Kevin,
you won't be doing much talking, Greg.
All right, so what's your thought on the draft, Greg?
Overall, I thought it was a good draft. I think he's going to have some good players, but I think pretty soon Ballard's going to have to start getting aggressive in the draft. Trading up to maybe get a kind of a playmaking, maybe a potential superstar player. You kind of look at what Philadelphia's been doing. They've been trading up and manipulating the draft board so much that they're ending up with a lot of talent. And I think the Colts have talent, but I just don't think it's enough talent. It's enough playmaking talent. And I just think it's time for him to. I mean, the roster's nice. Don't get me wrong sometimes, but I think Rick Venturi said it. The top 10 to 15 players are really lacking, as compared to other teams.
Yeah, I mentioned this. For a second there, I thought that was Greg's phone that he was holding up to that. I would agree in the sense of, I was a big fan of them potentially trading back into round one. Basically Ballard's thought process is the draft's a crapshoot. I'm just going to throw a bunch of darts at the board, and hopefully one of them are going to hit in round 4 or 5.
I don't dislike that theory, though.
But I also do think that they just need more high-end talent. And again, they didn't necessarily turn, 3 5th-rounders, let's trade that for a 3rd-rounder to get another crack there. But I'll stand by the premium positions were a huge, huge focus. And to me, that's a win. That's a win in today's draft, and it's a change of philosophy from how Chris Ballard typically operates.
Do other teams hyper-focus on the RAS, which is the new latest buzz, I realize, as much as the Colts?
I don't think to this degree. Again, the Colts have a 3-check priority list in the draft. Are you uber athletic? Did you play in the Senior Bowl? And are you a team captain? That's how they operate.
Hey, Jake, this text. You for sure would be the best guy to share a PBR with. Hell yeah.
Has this turned into just we need to check your ego here?
Oh, no. It needs no checking. I went to my 50-year-old physical, and they said, your blood sugar's a little high, and your flexibility needs some work, but your ego, very healthy. I said, well, thank you.
Joel Erickson joins us here in about 15.
At 107.5, The Fan.
Now, I'm not certain that the Larry David comparison is flattering. He's a funny guy, but he's neurotic, right? Now, are you guys saying I'm neurotic?
Oh, of course.
There are certainly words around that particularly come to mind.
Erotic?
No, I don't think
Not
I go
erotic.
there. No.
I would never describe you as that.
Can't say I've ever thought that.
It's definitely not what I wanted to do on a Monday morning.
Seemed
to see Joel texting you, Mark, saying, "Hey, I'm going to hold off on coming on the show today." Joel Erickson joins us here in a few minutes. Jake, I think if you're looking at a guy from this draft class, could be a day one starter, 17-game starter, I'd say the Warren Central kid's got a good chance. Again, Juju Brents, corner from Warren. Colts traded back twice on Friday night, took him 44 overall. He had his draft party at Birdie's in Westfield, right next to Grand Park.
Is that where they have the putt-putt dealio?
Oh, yeah. Place has got to make just an absolute killing with all the, baseball tournament's done. Let's go, do some putt-putt.
Yeah. Parents
can slam some beers
location, right?
Perfect. We talked about this on Friday, and this was before the Anthony Richardson press conference. But when I listen and hear people talk about Richardson, I get some Benedict Mathurin vibes in how the guy's kind of wired as a competitor, in that you have this balance of like uber confidence, but also full well there's a lot of work ethic that needs to be done. This was Anthony Richardson on Friday, and I think this quote kind of really encapsulates, I guess, what I'm getting at. Again, Richardson had his opening press conference Friday afternoon. He'll be back in town Thursday night for the rookie minicamp, and here was the 20-year-old on Friday.
Honestly, it's just keeping it real with yourself. I'm here for a reason. I worked hard. I put the work in, and obviously I showcase that I can be, a huge talent. But there's a lot of things I can clean up. Growing up, I always thought about Tom Brady, the way he worked. He has 7 rings. People say he's the greatest, but I always heard that he's constantly trying to get better day by day. And I thought about it, like, how can a guy that great try to get better, every single day? And I haven't done the things he's done. And I'm like, okay, I can definitely get better. If that guy's getting better, I can get better myself. So it's just a balance of knowing, like how confident you are in yourself, but also, being smart enough to understand that you can get better and you're not perfect.
He says all the right things for certain, or has so far, other than in Indianapolis. I don't know that you would say Tom Brady's the greatest, even though he is. But has said all and done all the right things so far, albeit in a very short window.
Yeah, I think that's just an important mindset to have. Again, from Shane Steichen to Jim Irsay, I get the vibe that they are willing and open to Anthony Richardson playing very, very early. I am also a fan of that sort of thinking. I thought Irsay had a really interesting comment on Saturday, and I think he's right, in that when Irsay looks at the Colts' schedule, he says that oftentimes he just wakes up a little bit with a different feeling on a Sunday morning when the Colts are facing a pocket passer versus a mobile quarterback. And I think that's kind of the day and age that we're starting to live in the NFL. But you do feel like at times, and I don't know, maybe the Commanders game stands out to Irsay from last year, but like, look at what Taylor Heineke did as a backup quarterback that can run.
Right.
I mean, he just was able to make plays and ended up winning that game. Whereas if you've got a backup quarterback that's a little bit more of a traditional passer, you don't feel that. You don't necessarily feel that. Of course, Richardson, takes it to a whole nother level from his running.
The running quarterback is starting to feel like the 7-foot wingman in the NBA, and the fact that you're like, man, guys that big, I never thought I'd see the day where a guy 7 foot could like put it between his legs and hit a pull-up jumper. And now there are more and more of them, and it's kind of the same thing at the quarterback position, right? There was a time where Randall Cunningham was a total anomaly because he could run and throw, and it was like, whoa, most guys can do one or the other, but both. And now it's becoming more of the preferred mainstream. It doesn't mean those guys grow on trees, right?
I did hear that, and I don't think this is the most shocking thing in the world, but there was certainly at least one important person inside that building that was not a fan of drafting Richardson, where the Colts took him. Again, to me, it isn't the most shocking thing. I do think Richardson would have some skeptics. Again, that accuracy number is really, really low.
I mean, he's raw, right?
And someone brought up to me over the weekend, like, there are a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL that at one point in college had a really low completion percentage number. But when they made their rise to being at an acceptable to above average level, they usually made that rise with another year in college. So that's the question with Richardson is you are expecting Richardson to make a jump, but he's got to do it in the NFL versus college. Like, will it be as easy for him to achieve that? How will he react to that, when adversity hits, all those things? That will be something that I think certainly will be a huge
baptism by fire,
for
right?
him. Yeah.
I mean, baptism by fire. I guess if you are trying to learn new habits as opposed to breaking old bad habits, what better place to do it than right there where there's then no change that needs to take place with the learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it and say the cement is really wet, and you can still, work with that. The also kind of bird on the other shoulder would say, but it's easier to maybe develop that in college where the competition is not like it is here in the NFL. Joel Erickson from the Star, he joins us next.
And 107.5, The Fan.
12 picks for the Colts in this draft, the most ever in the 7-round modern history of the draft. I think that dates back to 94. So quite a lot for Chris Ballard and company, and the man who was extremely busy this weekend Covering it all, Joel A. Erickson from the Star joins us now. Joel, actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to go back to Thursday night because we were sitting there when Houston takes C.J. Stroud at 2, and for whatever that was, 5-6 minutes, you're thinking to yourself, oh boy, what is about to happen at 3? Who is going to trade up? Will there be a trade up? What happens if a quarterback goes, and how will the Colts react to that? Are you of the belief they would have taken Will Levis had a team traded up for Anthony Richardson?
That's a fantastic question, and I kind of lean that they would not have made a pick at 4 and would have traded down. They may have still ended up with Will Levis, but I think it would have been later. And I'm that's kind of just a gut feel. I know what Jim Irsay said. I know he said I think we would have taken Will Levis, but I don't know. The fact that Levis lasted as long as he did, ended up going all the way to the second round. I think maybe they would have tried to get more picks out of it because we ended up seeing later in the draft that Chris Ballard aggressively tried to get more picks. So, I think that number 4 they might have tried to trade out of.
Yeah, I don't think it's it's like a big majority of the Colts fan base at all that would think this, but it is interesting, Joel, if you just look at, okay, you could have gotten Anthony Richardson, like the Colts did, or, in the Titans case, they come away with, arguably the best offensive lineman in the draft in Peter Skoronski, and then Will Levis. Like, obviously, just with these two teams in the AFC, we'll naturally compare them for years to come. But the fact that Levis fell as much as he did, that's going to be certainly a storyline we'll at least talk about twice a year coming up in the fall.
The other thing that keeps hanging out in the back of my head about what maybe they wouldn't have taken Levis is if the Texans don't trade up, if it's Anthony Richardson at 3 to Seattle or whoever, that means Will Anderson is still on the board.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I mean, man, I feel like if you're Chris Ballard, it'd be tempting, to go for Will Anderson at that spot. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where I lean. I know what Jim Irsay said. I'd be curious to find out what everybody else was thinking. I don't know if we're going to get their thoughts on that publicly, but I'd be curious to see what everybody else was thinking in that moment.
Joel, what about the Colts draft surprised you? Either a position they didn't go after or a position they went heavy on that surprised you?
Really, I think the thing that surprised me most was that they took a receiver who's 5'9". Chris Ballard just hasn't done that. I mean, I know they signed Isaiah McKenzie. I was at the owners' meetings when Shane Steichen said, I like receivers with a varying bunch of different skill sets. But, I've just gotten used to Chris Ballard takes receivers who are 6'3" and 215 pounds, which is the average of the 7 he'd taken before that. And so, like, when I was putting together my who to watch for in the second round, I didn't put Downs on it, not because I didn't think Downs was a good player, but just because they just don't take players that short. So that was probably the biggest surprise for me was, that this is a change in what they've wanted in the past, taking a player who's that far under 6 feet.
Joel, if I made you write down one name on a sheet of paper right now and the parameters were, this is your best bet of a rookie to start 17 games here this season, would Juju Brents be that guy?
Yeah. I was gonna say if you add in if you count on Slot as a starter, you could write Downs in there. But it just with the corner situation the way it is, knowing that Kenny Moore is a nickel. I mean, he plays outside in base, obviously, but Gus Bradley referred to him as a nickel. So in 75-80% of the snaps, he's going to be inside. Brents seems like a no-brainer that Brents ends up starting there. And it'll be interesting to see, Chris Ballard's had some issues with corner in the draft in the second round, especially in terms of immediate impact. So it'll be interesting to see how Brents does right away. Obviously, I thought the other kind of funny thing with all the corners they took is Gus Bradley kind of downplayed the idea that they love tall corners the week before the draft, and then all three they drafted are 6'2" or taller. So it still matters. The height thing still matters.
Yeah, honestly, Joel, the name that I might write down second on that list, I think there's a good chance Richardson plays very early, but I probably wouldn't put him second. I understand Downs. The name I might put second would be the next corner that they took in Darius Rush in round 5, just given, yes, people thought he might go earlier than that, but just given the scarcity of that position.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting what they're doing there. They've done this before where they took a corner in the second and then a corner in the fifth when they took Rocky Sin and Marvell Tell, and both of those guys ended up playing. Tell didn't really start. I think he played like 250 snaps as a rookie, but they've done it before where they pick guys like this without a ton of other options there, and they ended up starting him. So it's interesting. It seems right now like they're just going to kind of go with the young guys and see where it goes. That kind of speaks to the fact that this is a longer-term plan and build the way they've constructed it this offseason.
Joel A. Erickson is our guest. He's on the Payless Liquors hotline. Joel, my question for you regarding the current Colts roster, and by that I mean going into the draft. Tell me the player on the Colts roster that should be most elated by the Colts draft pattern this year, and tell me the player that probably was the most unsettled by the way they drafted.
Most excited, Will Fries. They didn't end up taking an interior player until we got to the undrafted free agent part. So, and Tony Sperano kind of hinted at this last week when we talked to him that he liked Will Fries as a starter at right guard, or he liked where he was headed developmentally. But draft wise, I think after corner, kind of expected them to go guard and try to get somebody to compete for the starting job there. So the fact that they didn't. Will Fries, to be sure. I think going the other way, probably I don't know, maybe Isaiah Rodgers, just given that.
What about the in-house tight ends?
The tight end, I think the tight ends probably, but I don't know. It's hard to know which tight end should feel concerned. I think you probably guess Kylan Granson,
because the guy they drafted is more Granson-like than a Mo Alley Cox-like.
Yeah, and Jelani Woods is Jelani Woods. I don't think he's threatened at all. So yeah, I think that the other thing I was thinking was Rodgers, just because Rodgers is coming up here where he kind of needs to get a full year as a full-time starter going into his contract year, and drafting a bunch of tall corners that this defensive coordinating staff seems to like. Obviously, like last year, Rodgers outplayed Faison from start to finish, and somehow only got a very minimal amount more snaps than Faison did. I think that you could look at it that way too and go, I'm going into trying to prove I'm a starting cornerback so I can get starting cornerback money, and they just drafted 3 guys who are all tall.
Joel A. Erickson from the Stars with us here on the Payless Liquors hotline. What was it, 9 picks on day 3, Joel? The one that you're most intrigued by. It doesn't have to necessarily be the best pick, but just intrigued by the story, the background, whatever.
Most intrigued by probably Jake Witt, the last pick. Just because everything I've read on him sounds like this guy is. And Chris Ballard kind of admitted that that's a swing. They're just throwing that one into the. He's got all the tools for it. He hasn't done it very much. He's super raw. They just want to see if they can get it out of him, and that's an interesting story. But I think the other part of it that's interesting is every once in a while, there's a lot of these guys that don't pan out. Don't get me wrong. There's a bunch of these guys who get taken because of their tools and stuff, and they don't ever develop into it. But every once in a while, a team does take a guy like that, and it ends up working out. Like Jordan Mailata for the Eagles is a good example.
I mean,
and so
Denzel Good, right? I mean, he was like a 7th or 8th rounder from a small school and was a nice player for them.
Yeah. So those stories are always interesting because sometimes those guys end up turning into something that you weren't necessarily expecting. I mean, Mo Alley Cox, he hasn't reached I think what the Colts thought was his ceiling. But you consider his basketball background and what he's turned into, especially as a blocker, that's kind of similar. And so, I think that's probably the most intriguing one to me is can they take this lump of really, really raw, even more raw than, say, Richardson, and can Tony Sperano turn him into something?
Joe, we were talking about this earlier. Probably on a couple of each hour we've brought this up, but I want your thought on it. I think Kevin agreed with me on this. One of the first things I mentioned this morning to him, now that the draft was over, was it would appear as though if there is concern about the health of Shaquille Leonard, the Colts don't find it to be concern enough that they needed to immediately start making a backup plan. Or that if they do need to make a backup plan, it's already on the roster. Agreed?
Yeah. I think it's probably EJ Speed is what they're betting on. Gus Bradley said some really, really praise. He's praised AJ Speed and the way he grew in the defense last year. But to the larger point, I think you're right. Them not taking a linebacker, not sort of backstopping themselves. It is a bet on it because they had a pretty good player there in Bobby Okereke last year. You don't know if what Speed did at I guess it's the auto here, the strong side linebacker, would translate to the other side. And they haven't really added anybody who's a linebacker. Now they did give one undrafted free agent a $100,000 guarantee, but he's an undrafted free agent. So
you mind expanded on that, Joel?
I think that's a good take on it.
You mind expanded on the undrafted linebacker? I know you do a lot of homework on that group and just what that type of signing bonus means. We obviously saw last year JoJo Doman, an undrafted linebacker, make the team. Yeah, so the interesting thing is that as much money as the guarantees get, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make the roster. I'm pretty sure that last year Ryan Vandermark, the tackle, got something like $275,000 in guaranteed money, and he didn't make the roster. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make it. What it generally means is that other teams were after you. And Donovan, you've seen the guy from Houston. He's played a lot. He's been around a lot. I think he tested fairly well. And there were clearly – Ballard said they kind of had a priority on linebackers since they didn't draft one in the undrafted free agent. There must have been other teams coming after him that made them feel like they had to up the guarantee. It's really not a huge guarantee, though, compared to the rest of the league, whereas like Vandermark I know was up at the very top of biggest guarantees last year. $100,000, I think, when I counted it up, at least the information I have, it's more around like 15th. And that information probably doesn't have everybody, so it's probably more around the 20th range. Again, Joel Erickson is with us here from the Indianapolis Star. Joel, I know the athletic trait headline stands out to you about this Colts draft class. Like, that was easily, I think, the most popular thought that I saw from, national draft people or just general Colts fans. To me, it's not that big of a difference from typical Ballard drafts. I mean, it's probably a slight increase, but Ballard always drafts guys that are crazy athletic and go to the Senior Bowl and are team captains. To me, what I think is the biggest difference in this draft is I saw premium positions addressed earlier than he's ever really done. I mean, when you talk about, and again, this is my opinion, but I look at quarterback, wideout, tackle, defensive end, and corner. Those five, to me, stand above the rest of all the other positions. Well, the first 4 picks, he drafted 4 of those 5. And then you go 5 of the first 6. And then you go 8 of the 12 if you look at the entire draft class. For me, I think this draft class stands out in that area. It was more of an earlier focus on the premium positions compared to other Ballard drafts.
Well, and I think he's done that in some of the other drafts in terms of he drafted premium positions in the second and third round. But what this draft didn't have that the other ones have is the one where we're sitting there and the name comes up and the position comes up and you're going, they took Jonathan Taylor, a running back, when they already have Marlon Mack. Or Okereke, I remember that pick being that way, where it's like, they took a linebacker, and it feels like they're already kind of set there for the immediate future. There wasn't a lot of picks that like you could look at as, okay, this is for 1 year out when this guy's a free agent and we might want to move on from him. And I think part of that is if you looked at the depth chart going into the draft, this team had a significant need for depth at just about well, not every spot, but a lot of different spots on the roster. They had to fill a lot of needs. They haven't done a lot in terms of, adding some of those back end parts of the roster in free agency, like especially on the offensive line. That's the one I'm thinking about the most. If you look at the offensive line depth chart going into the draft and even coming out of it, there's a real lack of experience, depth there, and so they had to make a lot of picks to kind of, in an effort to re-inject some depth into this roster.
Joel A. Erickson is our guest, Indianapolis Star, where you can read his work. Payless Liquors Hotline is where his voice is now. Joel, other teams around the league, and I realize your focus is on the Colts, but whether it be from your own observation or just from some of your colleagues maybe in discussing it, any other team that jumped out at you either as one that you thought, okay, they had a really good plan and I think they've got to be thrilled with the draft, or a team where you said, what in the world are they possibly doing?
Detroit was confusing.
Marc agrees with you.
I told you.
First round, Detroit was just really confusing going Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 and then taking Jack Campbell, the linebacker, at 18 or 20. I can't remember the right route, the right pick for sure. But that's kind of the opposite of what KB was just saying about taking premium positions. They didn't just take non-premium positions. They took players who were expected to fall farther. I mean, I think if it was Bijan Robinson at 12, he'd be like, okay, they took a running back, but it's supposed to be a generational one. Jahmyr Gibbs, my understanding, is more of a passing down complimentary back, and they signed David Montgomery from the Bears for $6 million a year during free agency. That was a strange one. And then I think the other one that sticks out just from the first night, I can't remember. I actually don't know what they did the rest of the draft, but the Texans kind of taking the big swing with the two big time guys, the quarterback and the defensive end at 2 and 3. Obviously inject some interest into a franchise that when we've gone down there the past couple of years, there hasn't been any. There's just not a lot of tents in the parking lot, that kind of thing. But also after seeing some of the stuff that people said about the Texans are all in on Bryce Young, you wonder how all in they are on C.J. Stroud now. I mean, they took him at 2, but everything we heard, where did that come from? Was there some truth to that? Did they kind of feel pressured to make a pick there that they didn't necessarily want to make?
All right, last one, Joel. Appreciate the time here. And again, as Jake said, IndyStar, all of your coverage from Joel A. Erickson, Nate Atkins as well, all weekend long. I get the vibe from Shane Steichen and Jim Irsay, Joel, that they are very willing to potentially throw Anthony Richardson out there week 1. As of May 1st, your thoughts on the Colts week 1 starter, emphasis on May 1st?
Yeah, I think right now, I've based on what Steichen and Irsay said, especially Steichen, I would put it on Richardson. We've asked Steichen a couple of times about Gardner Minshew, even going back to way before they made the pick, about whether, I think someone asked, point blank, I'm assuming Gardner Minshew's going to start. And he has been very reluctant to say anything even remotely in the range of that. I think they want to play him. And I think the other part of this is they don't necessarily have to win right away. Jim Irsay has floated this a couple times now. He's brought up the early Peyton years, how they had some years where the record was bad, but they knew they were headed in the right direction. I think that experience for him is important here because it means he's less likely to be like, we have to win right away. And so if you don't feel like you have to win, you might be you're probably more comfortable with starting Anthony Richardson, even if there's some hiccups in there.
Winning, and I like Gardner Minshew. I do. But winning with Gardner Minshew does nobody any good, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the reality. You might as well, if eventually you're going to hand the keys over, you might as well just say, you know what, go, right? I mean, take the training wheels off and go.
I keep thinking about this. There's actually a drawback if you have a guy there who's capable of winning enough that it puts you in like a we're not going to develop the rookie right away position. I just keep thinking about the Dolphins with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua Tagovailoa, where like Tua's career kind of got herky-jerky start because they kept like using Fitzpatrick essentially as a closer in baseball. They would be like, this game's not going well. We're going to pull him in. And, like, it did work for them. It got them wins. But in terms of the most important thing, which is getting their quarterback ready to play, it didn't work out. And I've thought about that a lot. If whoever this quarterback is that you're going to have as the backup/placeholder, you don't want them to keep this guy off the field when he might be ready to play.
Plus, and this might sound a little harsh, but if you're worried about this kid's scar tissue and handling whatever poor moments as a rookie, then I don't know if he's wired in the right way to handle just inevitable ups and downs that come during the NFL season. Again, that it might be a little bit too critical early in his career, and I get he's about to turn 21 years old here in a few weeks. But to me, he strikes me as a guy that could handle that. And again, if that's a big worry for you, then you're going to probably hit some bumps in the road down in his future.
Yeah, and wouldn't the same thing then apply if you're worried about that hurting his confidence? Wouldn't the same thing apply to starting Gardner Minshew for somebody like Gardner Minshew for 13 games?
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think Minshew's a good backup, but we know what his ceiling is as a starter, and that can be just as big a deal. Who's playing in front of me in terms of confidence. I'm not speaking about Richardson specifically. I think what Jamie Moore said about Richardson specifically is something that I've thought about all draft cycle with these guys. Playing at Florida is an enormous amount of pressure, especially when you're a 5-star prospect or a 4-star prospect or whatever Richardson was.
From Gainesville.
He's I think Jamie Moore said he's basically a local legend there. Like the pressure that comes with that, and then he's already had to deal with the disappointment of going 6-6 and not playing like a superstar right away and having to sit behind people. I think that he's probably been through more than people realize when you think about a 21-year-old. Just because I used to cover SEC teams, the pressure on those quarterbacks is enormous.
Just matters more.
And Gardner Minshew, back to that point though, Joel. When Gardner Minshew signed here, he had to know the reality, right? I mean, he comes in and he knows they've got the number 4 pick. I would assume that he is well under the understanding when he came in, hey, I'm here in a leadership role, and that might mean starting a game. It might mean starting 12, but either way, he has to know that reality, right?
Yeah, I mean, the contract he signed is for $3.5 million with a potential up to $5.5 million based on playing time. That's actually kind of low for a top-end backup quarterback.
Right.
So,
and he is a top-end backup. I mean, let's be real, right? He's one of the better backups you could get.
Yeah, and so if you look at that contract, Gardner Minshew has been in the NFL long enough to be, and he's smart enough to know, okay, I signed for $3.5 million. I'm not signing to any kind of birthright here.
Joel, great work all weekend long. Frankly, I just enjoyed your sane company in that room, which can get a bit chaotic in there, especially when Drake the dog comes in and starts eating the media food.
Drake moves around. Drake's under your feet. He's on one side of the room. He's on the other one. That dog explores the space.
Tell you what, dude, we're talking about the RAS score on Drake. He's a little Josh Downs-like moving in and out of some of his breaks there. So quite the effort from Jim Irsay's canine there.
So
on
not
Saturday.
Drake Nevis is what we're getting at, right?
No, not. But I did like Drake Nevis. He had a great attitude. Joel, great work, man. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate having me on, guys.
Joel A. Erickson right there on the Indianapolis Star. A little rundown here on some of the local guys, Jake. Again, Aiden O'Connell to the Raiders in round 4. Payne Durham will be a Tampa Bay Buck. That was in round 5. How about the whiteout room that Charlie Jones walks into? The Bengals.
There's at least 2 of them you're probably not going to get in front of, right?
Big fall for Ben Davis product, DeJuan Jones. He fell to round 4. Cleveland there. Some questions, I think a little bit more just weight-wise and, all in. It sounded like that was some of the questions there. Michael Mayer from Notre Dame to the Raiders. Again, a lot of Colts fans I saw wanted them to take Mayer at 35. The Raiders traded up with Indy originally. From 38 to 35, they ended up taking Mayer. Isaiah Foskey, Notre Dame defensive end to the Saints. Indiana, no one drafted. Cam Jones, their linebacker, went undrafted.
Did you already mention who was the basketball player from Ben Davis that was at Ohio State?
Yeah, DeJuan Jones,
yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Nimble, I'll say that, but I was thinking he probably was I thought I saw him projected as like a second to third rounder.
Yeah, I think people were really surprised he fell to 4. I loved it on NFL Network. They showed some Ben Davis basketball highlights, which was just great to see. He was worth the price of admission. Back in his high school days, watching him play basketball. Corey Trice, the Purdue corner who tore his ACL last year, he fell all the way to round 7.
Did you guys see Dane Brugler ranked his favorite and least favorite draft classes and where the Colts ranked?
It was really high, right? It was 2?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Just
Who do you have
behind the
as
Eagles.
one?
The Eagles.
Saw Kuiper just gave the Colts a B for his draft grade on that end.
You know what's always fun, though, is to go back and look at the draft grades that were given to draft classes that were outstanding.
Yeah.
You know, and at the time, who is this linebacker out of South Carolina State? That's terrible.
I mean, Leonard was a universal, like, F.
Right.
Everybody gave him an F. And then, Defensive Rookie of the Year, one of the greatest seasons for any rookie in NFL history. All right, our pop quiz is coming up. Jiffy Lube oil change, is that it, Mark?
Correct, yeah.
Jiffy Lube oil change we are giving away for that. Before that, though, let's hit a morning checkdown.
The Morning Checkdown. On 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
We'll begin with this score from late last night, and just for those of you, I offer this as a public service announcement. It was nearly TSA Atlanta Airport 1, Jake Query nothing. Apparently TSA, the pre-approval line closes at 9. They all go home at 9. It's not like it's the busiest airport in North America or anything. So
you would think if any airport would extend that longer, it would be Hartsfield.
I've never heard of the TSA pre-approve area being closed. But yeah, like I showed up at Hartsfield and they're like, nope, sorry, you got to go in. And to go in with the masses, I mean, come on.
Yeah,
You know who I am.
Welcome to Mark and I. That sounds like the same thing you try to pull at the NFL Combine. Sir, you can't come in. You don't have your credential. Do you know who I am?
I'm like, wait a minute. I don't take my shoes off. No, I don't do that. I've never had to do that before.
You see his picture of me and Bucky?
Like,
you think anybody gets a picture with him? No, sir.
5,000 people waiting in line, and then one guy, there's always one jackass, right? Excuse me, one guy actually said this. We're all waiting in line. It comes to a screeching halt. Everybody's standing there looking around, looking at their watches. One guy starts pushing his way through. Excuse me, I'm going to miss my flight. What do you think? You think the rest of us are here to get popcorn? What are you doing?
Did he stand up on the flight as soon as it landed too? Even though he's in
he actually was on our flight, and yes, he did do that. Major League Baseball yesterday. Speaking of Atlanta, they played the Mets yesterday. No, they didn't. It was postponed due to rain. But the Cubs did play. They lost to the Marlins 4-3. It was the Dodgers doubling up the Cardinals 6-3. A's over the Reds 5-4.
Are you going to abandon being a Reds fan? Are you going to abandon
They've won
following
5 of
this
6,
team?
Mark. Don't look now.
Yeah.
One of those.
How have your Cubs done lately?
That's the battle to avoid relegation. Baltimore Orioles 5-3 over the Tigers. Cute fella, man. I'm telling you. Just buy me the beer now, Mark.
Yeah?
Buy me the beer now.
I can definitely just bring it in.
Yeah.
Diamondbacks did beat the Rockies 9-4. Indianapolis Indians also postponed due to rain yesterday with the Columbus Clippers.
Steph Curry lit the beam yesterday in Sacramento. 50 points for him in a historic Game 7 performance, the most we've ever seen in a Game 7. Sacramento played with fire and not beating Golden State with Draymond Green on sideline or Harrison Barnes missing the shot or Game 5 at home. It went to a Game 7, didn't matter. They had home court. The Warriors dominated the second half. They advanced to take on the Lakers. Your favorite semifinal series, Jake?
That is a good question. I would say Lakers-Warriors, but it's kind of a tired storyline, right? Same with Boston-Philly. Probably Miami-New York. Miami Eric Spoelstra can coach, man. And they, you look at guys like Gabe Vincent comes off the bench, or I don't even, maybe he started, scores 20 for them. They just find different guys every night.
Yeah, Lakers-Warriors obviously will be the first thing you hear on every outlet, but I do feel like we've reached a point with LeBron and Steph, and obviously they each have had performances in these playoffs would say otherwise, but I think the storyline is like, will this be it?
Yeah.
And for the Warriors, it's more of like, will this be it for their group?
Actually, the one, Kevin, amongst the matchups that gets overlooked, obviously, because I didn't think of it, Phoenix and Denver. I mean, Phoenix is
went
starting to
all
come
in. together.
They did, and they're starting to come together a little bit. But Denver's awfully good, man.
Lakers Warriors is going to get a lot of the pub, and how crazy is it that they're a 6-7 matchup?
Yeah.
6-7. First time in NBA playoff history we have all 8 seeds represented in the semifinals, and the first time ever you've had 4 lower seeds advance out of round 1. Jake, yesterday at Barber, it was the Penske team getting, a first and a third? Will Power didn't get to Grosjean there late, right?
Will Power had a good run, though. Romain Grosjean was the pole sitter and was leading the race at Barber Motorsports Park late, and then Scott McLaughlin basically baited him into a move. Grosjean made a slight hiccup, and McLaughlin took advantage. Scott McLaughlin goes on to get the win. Romain Grosjean finishing second. Strong finish for Will Power, who finished third. So that now sets the stage for 2 weekends from now, the road course at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before, of course, ending the month for the 107th Indy 500.
So 2 weeks from Tuesday will be the first time out on the oval in the month of May. That will be practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, leading into Fast Friday and quals. And Jake, you guys tonight at 8 o'clock, right?
That is correct. Beyond the Bricks with Mike Thompson beginning tonight at 8 o'clock, including audio from some of the stars of yesteryear, and by that I mean the early winners of the Indianapolis 500. Taking a look at the history of the first handful of years and hearing audio from those men that piloted cars back in the 19-teens to victory at Indianapolis.
Dialing it back.
That's right.
All right, it is time for the pop quiz. 239-1070. It's 317-239-1070. Jiffy Lube oil change is up for grabs. As I scroll through it, it seems to be doable.
It's always doable.
I think if you've listened to the show, Scotty, if you've listened to the show, this might be the easiest pop quiz we've ever had.
Really?
Yeah,
Well, that's where people are going to be in trouble.
The listening part of it.
We're being presumptuous.
Well, sometimes even our hosts have trouble listening during the show.
Excuse me?
I'm so tired.
I am tired.
Me too.
Pop quiz is next. 317-239-1070.
93.5 and 107.5, The Fan. Have you studied? Can you handle the pressure? Sharpen your pencils. It's time for the Pop Quiz with Kevin and Query. Brought to you by Jiffy Lube, Indiana's favorite oil change since 1985.
This Pop Quiz is a joke.
Wow. Now, see, you're making it so that there's two ways to look at this for the caller. Somebody's either going to call in because they're like, Kevin's talking about how easy it is, or they're like, well, this is setting the stage for someone to look like a total buffoon if they don't get it right.
Just trying to be honest. Honesty is what I try and give 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, and this Pop Quiz is a joke. I expect better from Scotty. But it does reward the listener.
I've never seen you like this.
Scotty just presented it, and I have to react.
You're ornery this morning, Kev.
This is not. This is honest.
Did you get enough sleep?
Actually, yeah. The kids actually slept pretty well. Yeah, Max battling cough per usual, but yeah.
Okay.
Do
you guys think it's difficult?
I haven't looked at it yet.
No shock there.
I can't get it open.
All right.
What's wrong with this email?
Can you at least provide us with a number while you try and open up the Pop Quiz?
2, the number of hours of sleep that I got.
Dose is who, Mark?
Steve.
Is this the Steve?
After 3 months of trying, I am honored to be selected to participate in the Pop Quiz.
Steve, are you ready for the month of May?
You know, I already have my checkered placemats on the table. I was at the Historical Society Friday picking up my porch pack, took a picture with the Borg Warner and posted to Facebook and got 90 likes on it.
Steve, here's the thing. This is what I love about this.
I'll give you a lot of credit. Carb Day last year.
Steve, you are native to Wisconsin, correct?
City of Chicago.
Okay, so, but my point being, I don't know how long you've lived in Indianapolis, but you've completely embraced certainly the Indianapolis Motor Speedway because you're a fixture there, and I truly do appreciate and respect the fact that you understand what it means to this community.
Jake, as a personal note, I have watched every Indianapolis 500 either in person and on TV since 1970, except 1985, when I made the mistake of going to a wedding that was held Sunday night.
Now, who got married?
A friend of mine's brother.
And is he still married?
He is still married.
Because I personally think anybody...
Steve, I kind of question you going.
I root for any marriage that takes place during the Indy 500 or any engagement that takes place on a Jumbotron. I root for divorce in both situations.
Who gets married on a Sunday, too? I get that it's Memorial Day weekend, but what are we doing here?
That's also a good point.
Steve, will we see you at Carb Day?
You will see me at Carb Day, and I'll have my special gift for the Bowen family.
That means a lot. Thank you,
Steve.
Steve, I have the immense amount of faith that you're going to go 5 for 5 on this Pop Quiz.
Okay.
I think better chance he goes 5 for 5 than any other result.
Okay. Steve, would you like for me, that would be Jake, to lead you off with question 1, or would you like for Kevin to lead you off?
I would like Kevin to lead me off.
Steve, the Colts drafted their highest number of players ever in the modern draft era. They had 7 rounds, obviously. They had 9 picks going into the draft. How many did they end up drafting? 10, 11, 12, or 13?
12.
Okay. Question 2. Among those 12 players, so yes, you did get that correct, which position is not represented? A, they did not draft a defensive tackle. B, they did not draft a running back. C, they did not draft a defensive end. Or D, they did not draft a linebacker.
A linebacker, D.
Okay.
You think the defensive end is the first ever player to play the position that is his last name? Gus Bradley has the Leo position. Titus Leo will be playing the Leo position.
You know, that's Tom Allen's favorite all-time player.
Leo, baby. All right, Steve, Leo. Here's number 3 here. The Athletics beat the Reds yesterday to snap a 5-game losing streak. The A's finished the month of April with a Major League worst record of 6-23. Just slow starters. How many of Oakland's wins have been credited to a starting pitcher? A, none, B, 1, C, 2, or D, 3?
A, none.
Question 4 for Steve. The second round of the NBA playoffs is set. 8 teams remain. Of those teams, which seed number has been eliminated in both the Western and Eastern Conference? A. What's that?
The first.
Hold on.
Okay,
hold on.
A, the number 7 seeds. B, the number 6 seeds. C, the number 5 seeds. Or D, every seed is still represented.
Wow. If it was an NCAA tournament question, I'd have that right away. We'll go, every seed is still represented.
Look at this. All right, folks, pull over if you're out there. The drama for number 5 has never been higher. The Florida Panthers eliminated the Boston Bruins in Game 7 of their opening round Stanley Cup playoff series, Steve, with the Bruins going down and the Milwaukee Bucks falling to the Heat in the first round of the NBA playoffs. The teams with the best records in the NHL and NBA failed to advance out of the opening round. When was the last time this happened? A, last year. B, 2012. C, 1997. D, it has never happened before.
Never happened before.
I'm a man of integrity with the pop quiz, so I will choose not to say anything. But if I were going to give a hint, I would have gone with the year that I graduated college, which Jake probably would have said 97.
What if I told Steve Dario Franchitti?
Oof. Well, he could have gone a couple years, but the only one that stands out is definitely that one. Oh, man. I thought we had it. All right. Simply, he got 1, 2, 3, and 4 right.
Let's go!
12 Colts. They didn't draft a linebacker. The A's stink. No starting pitching wins.
That is correct.
And 1 through 8 seed represented.
Loud and proud.
Question number 5. The last time that the team with the best record in the NBA and NHL playoffs each lost in the opening round in the same postseason. 2012, the Vancouver Canucks and Steve's hometown Chicago Bulls.
You blew it!
But Steve, you're not a loser. Please call back another time, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
You don't even get a lousy copy of our home game.
Carb Day. Tomato plants last year.
That's right.
Very thoughtful.
Now, somebody else brought you Coors Banquets, right?
Yeah, we had some Coors Banquets. Yeah, we'll certainly have a few coming up here the final Friday of May. But you, I know, have to work. But, yeah.
I do.
Yeah,
I've got a big day on Carb Day.
What's bigger, Carb Day or your graduation day? Because that's coming up too, right?
Ooh, a week from Wednesday.
Week from Wednesday.
Now, you're going to call in, right, when you're driving up 31?
Sure.
Oh, don't sure us. Come on, have some conviction with us.
I still feel like we need to make a remote.
What if I
show up?
What if I'm put on hold? That's
Again,
Jake for the north side.
I've heard the lunch buffet at the Hip Hugger, especially on Wednesdays, are pretty good. So you could probably stop there while you wait. And where are we? Are we indoors? Are we at a football field? Are we in a theater? What's our atmosphere looking like?
I think that's a good question, actually. I've got to look that up.
You might want to know where you're supposed to be.
Hopefully more success than
drive up and look for gowns.
You need to
I
know
don't
if
know.
you need to have aviator shades ready or what.
Have you done the try-on of the gown yet? Is the gown in your possession?
The gown is in my possession, yes. So is the cap and the little, what's the little...
tassel?
Yeah, no, the thing that goes, the red thing that goes around your... It's like a big, thick necktie.
Oh, yeah. Like a glorified scarf.
Yeah.
You gonna paint? Are you gonna do like a decoration on the top of your cap, like a lot of kids do these days?
I did that in high school. We were not supposed to, so I put black construction paper over mine and then ripped it off when I got up there.
Oh, look at you! What a rebel!
Total rebel, yeah.
Are you going to sign yearbooks? Hags, have a great summer.
Party all summer. See you next year. That's what I'm gonna write to every kid.
We'll do it one final time here. Kevin and Query on a Monday.
Inquiry on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
So it's been 30 years since I've been through one of these. So what do you do at these graduations? You sit and then somebody talks and then you walk across the stage and then you leave? Basically it.
Who's we got a guest speaker? Is it you?
They actually said to me, well, now, are you planning on going? And I said, I don't know that I am. Well, they might ask you to do a few things. I'm like, yeah. No, it is not me, so I don't know.
Remember when Andrew Luck got drafted and like he had to go back to Stanford, like he couldn't participate in those early OTA rookie minicamps because Stanford's on the quarter system.
Yeah.
And he had to go back, and there was like an NFL rule at that point that you had to complete your 3 years of coursework before you enter the draft. Like that's the rule, and Stanford had that. I do think something that's great about the CBA now, Jake, you no longer have like rookie holdouts extending into camp. You probably covered a lot of those.
Oh, a ton, yeah. And you're right, it was I
mean, think about how bad of a just look it is on the rookie. It puts them behind the 8 ball for their first year. It was so pointless. Now the CBA just pretty much has everything locked in on what these picks are. I think it's 4 for 25 for Richardson, 4 years, $25 million, I believe.
You had a lot of veteran holdouts back then that you don't get as much anymore either. I mean, you still get it a little bit, I guess, quarterback maybe, but I remember when I covered the Rams, Kevin Carter was a big camp holdout. It was a huge deal. And speaking of camp news coverage, whatever else, and I had forgotten about this. I'm almost getting like a PTSD over the Tebow summer. Do you remember there was just this weird, inexplicable 3-month era where ESPN was like all Jets coverage all the time? I mean, literally, it was like every 10 minutes, like back live at Jets camp. What? And now
are we back?
Yeah, the Aaron Rodgers thing. It's like, oh gosh, here we go again. I mean, and I get it. I mean, I think I've turned the corner a little more, Kevin, towards what you were saying about Rodgers being with the Jets and the fact that they may, in fact, be simply competent quarterback play away from being pretty competitive.
I mean, last year again, 7-4 going into December, and then just fell apart with quarterbacks that were you and me. 4 years, $35 million for Anthony Richardson, and then the Colts will have a 5th-year team option on him.
Is the 435 that's guaranteed, right?
Yeah, if they would like to exercise that. So, what's that break down to? A little less than $9 million per year in today's day and age of a quarterback. It's pretty good money.
That is. It's also, though,
good team money is what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, if you're the Colts, you got to cash in on that while you can because you have the flexibility right now to be able to spread some money around.
Marc will have his QB coach on tomorrow. Is that right?
Yep. We will have him on tomorrow.
Obviously, a whole lot went into that aspect to Anthony Richardson this offseason, and so we'll chat with him coming up on tomorrow's show. Jake, I was listening to the race, and I do apologize. Usually I sneak in some radio. It was mainly TV for me yesterday on that end. I thought at one point Lee Diffie called Barber Motorsports the Augusta National.
Yeah, that's kind of become its nickname.
Tell me more.
Well, just because it is pristine. I mean, it is literally like George Barber, who is the gentleman who owns Barber Motorsports Park. He's in his 80s. We had him on the radio broadcast, and Michael Young said, now, Mr. Barber, tell me what most you like about this event. And he said, what I like most about it is a family can bring their kids, and they aren't going to see too many drunks, because if you have too many beers here, we'll throw you right out of here. Wow. There's not a single speck of trash anywhere on it. It is.
So we should keep him away from the infield, beautiful. Is what you're saying?
It is. It is a beautiful, beautiful park. And the grounds, literally, it looks like it's owned by Kimlawn. I mean, everything's perfectly green. The trees are perfectly landscaped. It's gorgeous.
You sent Marc and I a video of you kind of driving in there, and it was a really cool video. I enjoyed watching it. But I do feel like that kind of goes against what I normally think of Alabama.
Yeah, and that's
maybe that's too stereotypical of me. But.
No, that's a fair. I'm telling you,
just racing.
The
in general,
east side of Birmingham. We drove last night. Davey Hamilton and I drove. Well, Davey drove, but he gave me a ride because he was flying out of Atlanta as well. And the drive from Birmingham to Atlanta, which is 120 miles, so that would be the east side of Alabama, and it is a beautiful drive. It's spotless. I mean, I'm telling you, that's going to be, once Nashville reaches its apex of population, which based on the traffic going through it is probably already there, and the 6.5 million people that were at the draft, the Birmingham's going to be the next city that people start flocking towards. Watch.
Detroit for the draft next year.
Yeah. I did see, it's interesting, I went back and found a newspaper article from Nashville.
Oh, boy.
3 days after the draft was there in 2019.
Greenberg already on, Mark, or do we need to toss to that?
It said 200,000 people were at the draft. That was according to the Nashville Tennessean 3 days after the draft.
You know, I do feel
now
bad
600,000
about this, and I'm already looking ahead, I guess, several years. At some point, Indianapolis will host the draft.
Undoubtedly.
And I cannot think of a worse sporting event to stand outside and hear names called than the draft. I
you
know
said
that,
it.
I know that I'm supposed to be on air and
know.
promote it because it's in our city and everything.
It does feel to me
awful.
Doesn't it feel to me like that's a bubble that's about to burst, though, and that people are going to be like, "Yeah, I can't believe we kind of did that."
I would think, but I mean, again, we can argue the numbers, but I think the early reports are like 250,000 at Kansas City, in Kansas City, Florida.
Well, that's become 350 now. You know, I saw again. It was 120 on the first night. That probably is legit, and then it was 60 on night 2, and now they're saying 320 total. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Need someone to crowd estimate
140,000 went for round 6. Okay.
Jake Query on Twitter to crowd estimation. He does some consulting work on the side. We'll continue to go over some other Colts draft picks tomorrow, and again, Anthony Richardson's QB coach will join us. Everybody have a great Monday.